Chapter 504. There were quite a few Lingu Valley villagers who responded to the deputy village chief's call. They swarmed forward, and most of them belonged to the deputy village chief's faction. At a time like this, they had to step forward bravely. "Enough!" The village chief's voice rang out. Although it gave people a feeling of age, it was full of dignity. The villagers who had already rushed to the bottom of the stage immediately stopped. They didn't dare to climb up the stage, and only stared at the old village chief. From beginning to end, Xiaoling Yu's expression was very calm. Even if the nearly 1,000 villagers rushed up to capture him, he didn't show the slightest bit of fear. "Release Kongping's restriction and let him explain everything from beginning to end," the old village chief said to the deputy village chief. "He's already said everything that needs to be said. I don't think there's a need to do anything more." The deputy village chief was unwilling to do as he was told. What harm is there in letting him say it one more time? The old village chief narrowed his eyes at the deputy village chief, but there was a sense of dignity without being angry. After being stared at by the old village chief like this for a while, the deputy village chief still walked in front of Kongping and released the restriction on him. "Benefactor, this matter has nothing to do with you. You don't have to take the risk for me." After Kongping regained his freedom of speech, the first thing he said was to Xiaoling Yu. His tone was clearly filled with gratitude. "Your life was saved by me. If you die like this, then wouldn't I have saved you for nothing?" "You'd better explain the matter clearly," Xiaoling Yu said calmly. Kongping nodded, then sneered at the villagers below the stage and said, "Do you all want me to die so badly? What good would it do you all if I died? Today, the deputy village chief used this matter to tie me up here and even wanted to burn me alive. Then in the future, he can easily tie one of you up here. The deputy village chief's family is very powerful, but if everyone continues to be like this, you'd better tell us what you did wrong. Say less useless things." The old village chief interrupted Kongping's words and reminded him. There were some things that everyone was well aware of, but once they were out in the open, their influence would increase many times over. However, even though Kongping only said half of what he wanted to say, the villagers were all god-tier cultivators after all. Naturally, they could guess the rest of what he wanted to say. Their gazes involuntarily turned to the vice-village chief and the people close to him. For many years, the deputy village chief's faction of villagers had been as arrogant as royalty in the Lingu Valley. Not only were they supercilious and domineering, they even occasionally bullied other villagers. The villagers hated the vice-village chief's faction very much, but they were also afraid of their great power, so they dared to be angry but did not dare to say anything. The deputy village chief's expression was extremely gloomy. If his gaze could kill, Xiaoling Yu, who was still standing on the stage unscathed, would have died countless times. At that moment, Kongping, who had been reminded by the old village chief, began to narrate the entire story. What Kongping said was completely the truth, but this truth was not what the villagers knew, nor was it one of the stories that had been circulating in the village. In truth, the entire story was that Kongping and the others had not collected enough meat when they went out to hunt last time. When they returned, they naturally did not have enough meat to pay the village's stipulated amount. Moreover, Kongping had indeed injured the villagers who had come to settle the score with the deputy village chief. The reason Kongping had attacked was because he could not accept the deputy village chief's attitude at that time. Is what he said true? After Kongping finished speaking, the old village chief asked the deputy village chief. At that moment, there was no sound below the stage. They were all waiting for the deputy village chief to reply, but the deputy village chief only stood on the stage with a gloomy expression. "Previously, I ordered you to ask Kongping's group about their harvest and accept what should be handed over to the village. I did not say that they had to hand over the full amount, nor did I say that they had to hand over the Silver Wolf King and the awakened ginseng. I only said that if they were willing to exchange them for meat, the village would give them a satisfactory price." The old village chief said to the deputy village chief with a bit of reproach, "I don't know if you didn't understand clearly or if you purposely changed my meaning." "Village chief, don't listen to Kongping's words. I can swear on my soul that if half of what I said is false, then let my soul scatter." Without waiting for the deputy village chief to finish speaking, Kan Ping had already taken the initiative to speak and continued to ask, "I dare to swear, deputy village chief, do you dare?" The deputy village chief naturally didn't dare to do so. Instead, he changed the topic and said, "But it's a fact that he injured the villagers. Even if we did something wrong, he shouldn't have attacked us. Attacking the people in his own village is also a big crime. But the reason he attacked was because you guys forced him too much. You guys created trouble for no reason and even wanted to tie him up. Naturally, he would resist. Moreover, he only resisted and did not attack viciously." Xiaoling Yu interrupted. "Humph. Your Excellency seems to be interfering a bit too much." The deputy village chief coldly snorted. The deputy village chief did not continue to argue. The facts were obvious, and the villagers were not fools. Naturally, they already knew the truth. In fact, the truth had already spread in the village before. It was just that no one dared to believe it because everyone was afraid of offending the deputy village chief. This time, if not for Xiaoling Yu standing up, Kan Ping would only have the fate of being burned alive. Even until his death, he would not be able to personally announce the truth to the public. There are still some suspicious points in this matter. Let Kan Ping go first and slowly investigate in the future. Everyone, disperse. At this time, the village chief gave a conclusion. Although the deputy village chief was unwilling, he could only do as he was told. He waved his hand and took back the rope. Kan Ping completely regained his freedom. However, he first went to Xiaoling Yu's side and bowed, saying, "Benefactor has saved Kan Ping's life again." At this time, Yueru also came up on stage. After Xiaoling Yu helped Kan Ping up, he said to the old village chief, "A good person was almost killed. Could it be that this matter is over just like this? Are you not going to give everyone an explanation in front of the entire village?" The old village chief did not answer. He only waved his hand with his back facing Xiaoling Yu. However, Yueru said, "This matter will end here. The deputy village chief is powerful. Even if we continue to investigate, it will be meaningless. Didn't you see how many people stood on the left side just now?" Xiaoling Yu was not afraid of the deputy village chief's power. However, he also did not want to cause too much trouble for himself. Now that Kan Ping had been saved, and the deputy village chief had lost face in front of the entire village, he should also stop. However, today, Xiaoling Yu had witnessed the deputy village chief's power in the Lingu Valley. It seemed that even the old village chief could not do anything about it. The deputy village chief had wronged Kan Ping and almost killed him. The matter was so obvious, but the old village chief did not intend to pursue the matter. Actually, it is precisely because no one pursued the matter and no one resisted that everyone became more and more afraid of the deputy village chief's power. If everyone could band together and pay more attention to their own rights, they would not be so arrogant. After all, they only make up 1/5 of the village's population, and not 3/5, Xiaoling Yu commented calmly. It's easier said than done. After all, they are a large clan. They can band together, but the rest of the village cannot. That is because we are not one family, but many families. Kan Ping shook his head and smiled bitterly. The villagers in the square had already dispersed as they discussed. Xiaoling Yu and Kan Ping also returned to the small stone house next to the medicinal garden. Xiaoling Yu's temporary resting place was next door to Kan Ping's. In fact, it was not far from Yueru's residence. The reason why Yueru lived nearby was because there were several medicinal gardens in the Lingu Valley nearby. As the only pharmacist in the village, she naturally had to live here and be responsible for the cultivation and collection of those medicinal herbs. For a long time, in order to allow the injured to recover faster, and also to make it easier for Yueru to save them, the injured in the Lingu Valley would usually be arranged to rest in the nearby houses. Kan Ping also lived nearby because he had been seriously injured in the dense forest. Now, he was the one who had not recovered from his old injuries and had to continue living next door to Xiaoling Yu. After this incident, I reckon that you will not be able to join the Lingu Valley anymore. Furthermore, it is very likely that you will be chased out tomorrow. After returning to the stone house, Yueru seemed to be somewhat worried as she spoke to Xiaoling Yu. "It doesn't matter to me. At most, I will just move to another village," Xiaoling Yu said casually. Indeed, after this incident, Xiaoling Yu no longer had any hope of joining the Linggu Valley. He really did not have to join the Linggu Valley. However, he had already thought about it. When the deputy village chief brought people to chase him out, he would teach them a lesson. However, he never expected that the next day, Yueru would jog all the way to him and tell him that his request to join the Linggu Valley had been approved by the old village chief and the deputy village chief. Furthermore, the deputy village chief did not seem to have any objections at all. After thinking about it carefully, Xiaoling Yu realized that the deputy village chief was probably afraid that he would not be able to find a chance to take revenge on him after he left. Thus, he decided to keep him here and use his power and advantage in the Linggu Valley to punish him. "You'd better not do anything overboard. I am not Kong Ping," Xiaoling Yu thought to himself after thinking things through. After resting quietly for a period of time, the old village chief came looking for him. He said to Xiaoling Yu, "Anyone who wants to join the Linggu Valley must first complete a mission. This mission is to go out of the village alone and hunt down 5 ordinary wolf demons. This is very simple for you, but you should still do it according to the village rules." Xiaoling Yu naturally would not reject such a simple mission. The next day, he left the Linggu Valley's main gate to search for wolf demons alone. There were many wolf demons near the Linggu Valley. Naturally, finding wolf demons was not a difficult task. Xiaoling Yu used less than half a day to successfully return to the Linggu Valley. When he handed over the 5 well-preserved wolf demon corpses to the old village chief announced that he was already a villager of the Linggu Valley. Chapter 505. The Linggu Valley had about 6,000 people, all of them were humans. 4,000 of them were male cultivators and 2,000 were female cultivators. Among the nearly 6,000 people, less than 20 of them had ascended from the lower realm. Most of the people in Lin Valley Village had grown up in the God realm. Almost all of them were born with the cultivation of true gods. Because of the imbalance between the sexes and the danger of going out to hunt, the Linggu Valley was unable to expand and could only barely maintain its size. Fortunately, most of the female cultivators in the village were not like those in the immortal, devil, and monster realms who refused to marry easily. The situation of the lower-level cultivators in the God realm forced them to find a home. In the God realm, the female cultivators were only responsible for giving birth to children. Generally, they would not go out to hunt. To them, this was a kind of protection and also for the long-term development of the village. In the divine realm, as long as one could eat and drink to their heart's content, there would never be a day where one's life essence would be exhausted. In other words, immortality was the same as immortality. Therefore, the cultivators at the bottom did not feel much pressure. This was also one of the reasons why female cultivators were willing to marry and give birth to children. In order to encourage marriage and giving birth, there were many rules in the village. There were many practical rewards for marriage and giving birth to children. The situation in the few villages near the Linggu Valley was more or less the same. There were more men than women. As for the situation in the God realm, no one knew. Generally speaking, newborn children did not need to go out to hunt. In other words, those deity cultivators basically ate and drank for free in the village. After all, an ordinary wolf demon's cultivation was around the great god stage. Deity cultivators would not be able to go out to hunt. However, there were also some deity cultivators who would go out. But most of them would follow a group of great god stage seniors to gain experience. The women and deity cultivators in the village did not need to go out. Therefore, the cultivators who went out to hunt would have to hand over some meat to feed these idle people. Regarding this point, even those single men did not have any objections. This was all information that Xiaoling Yu gradually learned after he became a villager in the Linggu Valley. Most of it was also told to him by Kong Ping and Yueru. After a woman gets married, what if her husband encounters danger and dies while out hunting? Xiaoling Yu asked. Of course it's to choose another marriage. After all, there are many men in the village. Women don't have to worry about not being able to get married, even if they are already married, Yuaru explained with a smile. Actually, there are many women who have been married many times. After all, everyone is immortal in theory. If a woman is widowed, she would have to be widowed for too long. This is too cruel for her. Therefore, the villagers will only sympathize with a woman who remarries. They won't discriminate against her, Kang Ping added. Then, is there a man who marries several women? Xiaolingyu asked curiously. There is, but it's very rare. Moreover, there is a rule in the village. If a man wants to marry more than one woman, other than the first wife, he can only marry a widow who has already been married and whose husband has died. On this point, almost no one in our village has ever violated it, Yuaru replied. Xiaolingyu nodded, indicating that he understood. Then, he said, this small village in the realm of the gods is really not much different from a mortal village. The only difference is that the cultivators in the realm of the gods are very indifferent to carnal desires. Most of them marry and have children for the sake of dual cultivation and nurturing their descendants. Sigh, actually, if this goes on, what's the difference between us and those mortals? At most, we'll just live a little longer. However, it'll only be a longer ordinary life. It's dull and gray, and there's no hope at all, Yuaru said with a sigh. It's not that there's no hope. How vast is the immortal realm? As long as we can cultivate to the heavenly god tier, we'll be able to leave this village and experience the outside world to seek more opportunities, Kang Ping said with great ambition. Let's not talk about how difficult it is to cultivate to the realm of the gods. Even if we really manage to cultivate to the realm of the gods, we might lose our lives not long after leaving the village. The outside world is very big and very exciting, but it's also very dangerous. Yuaru shook his head and smiled bitterly. That depends on what you think. If you want to live a peaceful life, just stay in this village. If you want to improve and seek opportunities, then you naturally have to take risks, Kang Ping said with a smile. After Xiaolingyu stayed in the Linggu Valley for a period of time, the few groups of cultivators who had gone out to hunt all returned one after another. However, what they did not expect was that almost every group had suffered great losses. After asking carefully, they found out that almost all the groups that the Linggu Valley had sent out to hunt last time had encountered large groups of silver-armored cultivators. Moreover, those silver-armored cultivators had attacked them without saying a word. It was as if they had a deep grudge against the Linggu Valley. The cultivators of the Linggu Valley were very experienced in dealing with wolf demons. As long as they did not encounter large groups of wolf demons or a silver-haired wolf king, they would not suffer too many losses. However, they lacked experience in fighting against other cultivators. In addition, the silver-armored cultivators had a greater advantage in numbers every time they attacked, so the Linggu Valley's hunting teams were in such a miserable state this time. It was very obvious that those silver-armored cultivators had a purpose. They had premeditated and prepared to attack the Linggu Valley's hunting teams. It was almost as if they were declaring war on the Linggu Valley with their actions. After hearing this news from Yuaru, Xiaolingyu was a little surprised and asked, "Are those silver-armored cultivators from the nearby villages?" The injured had been sent to the few stone houses next to the herb garden to recuperate. Naturally, Yuaru was the first to receive a lot of information. Yes, they are from Silvermoon Village, which is only 30,000 kilometers away from us. Yuaru nodded and replied. Is Silvermoon Village very strong? Xiaolingyu frowned and asked again. They are a little stronger than our Linggu Valley. They have close to 10,000 people. Yuaru replied. For some reason, ever since Xiaolingyu stood up for Kang Pingqiang last time, Yuaru often came to chat with him. It seemed that Yuaru admired Xiaolingyu's righteous and courageous character from the bottom of his heart, so he was willing to interact more with Xiaolingyu. I don't know how the village is going to deal with this. If they dare to attack us, then they must have something to rely on, Xiaolingyu said worriedly, as if he really thought of himself as a person from the Linggu Valley. This time, Silvermoon Village's actions are too despicable. I think the village will definitely gather the villagers to take revenge on them. Yuaru said. Just as Yuuru said, the village chief quickly gathered all the villagers at the square. Then, the village chief stood on a high platform and reprimanded the cultivators of Silvermoon Village. He said that in the future, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. However, he didn't say how or when. But these words of reprimand couldn't be heard by the people of Silvermoon Village. Apart from letting the people of the Lingu Valley secretly sigh in relief, it didn't have any practical effect. However, after the gathering, the anger of the Lingu Valley villagers subsided quite a bit. It seems like this matter is going to be left unsettled, Xiaolingyu said with a smile. After waiting for more than 10 days, he didn't see any big movements from the Lingu Valley. They weren't as strong as the other party, so they definitely wouldn't be able to gain any advantage if they fought head-on. Other than reprimanding them, what else could the people of the Lingu Valley do? They couldn't possibly attack Silvermoon Village, could they? If they were to go to war, the casualties would definitely be huge. In order to fill their stomachs and survive, these cultivators at the bottom of the God Realm might go out and hunt with all their might. However, if they were asked to fight and sacrifice themselves, they would definitely not be too willing. Xiaolingyu had already become a villager of the Lingu Valley. Naturally, he didn't have the right to eat and drink for free. Furthermore, he had the obligation to provide for the women and the weak in the village. Hence, a month after he came to Silvermoon Village, he went out to hunt with a group of villagers. Every once in a while, the Lingu Valley would send out a group of cultivators to hunt. Each group had about 500 people. There were about 6 groups of 500 people in the entire village. They took turns to hunt, and after each group of 500 people left the village, they would split into more than 10 small groups. Each group had about 30 people. Xiaolingyu was in one of the small groups. And the villagers in this small group were all on good terms with Kong Ping. However, the difference was that the small groups that went out to hunt this time had a total of 50 people. The scale of the small groups was much larger than before. The main purpose of the small groups was to prevent any sneak attacks from outsiders. With Xiaolingyu in the group, his small group naturally wouldn't be in danger. Even if Xiaolingyu didn't deliberately show off, he would still be able to protect the safety of this group of villagers. Because the people of Silvermoon Village had previously ambushed the hunting groups of the Lingu Valley, everyone was very cautious and careful. They had always been hunting in the outskirts of the secret territory. They weren't in a rush to succeed. Xiaolingyu also wouldn't encourage everyone to take risks just because he was relatively strong. All the hunting activities were carried out step by step. Because there were no casualties, the fighting strength of the small groups was not affected. Hence, everyone's harvest naturally increased. Everyone's faces were full of smiles. Everyone could keep the rest of their harvest, except for a portion that had to be handed over. And the amount that they had to hand over was fixed. Hence, the greater their harvest, the more they could keep for themselves. A month after leaving the Lingu Valley, Xiaolingyu's small group had just surrounded and killed a group of dozens of wolf demons. Suddenly, dozens of streams of light suddenly flew towards them from all directions. Although this attack came very suddenly, it flew over from 1,000 feet away. Everyone still had time to react and put up a defense. The divine sense of a great soul stage cultivator could be used to guard 1,000 feet around him. These sudden sneak attacks could only be carried out from 1,000 feet away. Otherwise, it would be easy to be exposed in advance. Xiaolingyu's eyes were sharp and his hands were fast. Those streams of light had just flown over when he had already struck out a circle of primal chaos seal, blowing up the dozens of streams of light. The remaining streaks of light were received by the other 40 or so teammates. The opponent's sudden sneak attack only injured 3 people in Xiaolingyu's group. Chapter 506. With Xiaolingyu in the team, the operation of the silver-armored cultivators could only end in a crushing defeat. After leaving behind nearly 80 corpses, only a dozen or so people fled in panic. Xiaolingyu's team only had 2 people killed in battle, and a dozen or so were seriously injured. Although Xiaolingyu was powerful, in such a chaotic situation, it was impossible for her to take care of everyone's safety. It was inevitable that there would be casualties in the team. After cleaning up the battlefield, no one was in the mood to hunt again. Moreover, they had already gained a lot this time. In addition, they also wanted to report the incident of the Silvermoon Village cultivators to the village chief, so everyone unanimously decided that it was time to return to the village. The journey back had been very safe and peaceful, but at this moment, the Lingu Valley was very noisy and lively. From everyone's words, it could be seen that of the 10 teams that went out this time, except for Xiaolingyu's team, almost all of them had been ambushed by the silver-armored cultivators from Silvermoon Village, and suffered heavy casualties. The villagers who were injured last time had yet to recover. This time, close to 200 people had died outside, and 200 more were injured. This had already damaged the vitality of the Lingu Valley. It was no wonder that the entire village was furious. They could tolerate it once, but if it happened again, the villagers of the Lingu Valley would not be able to tolerate it. If they did not take effective action, who would dare to go out to hunt again in the future? Even if everyone mustered up their courage and went out again, they would still be surrounded and killed, and there would still be heavy casualties. There were only so many people in the Lingu Valley, how many times could they be killed? As for how the Lingu Valley would deal with this matter, Xiaolingyu could not control it, and there was no need for her to worry about it. The actions of Silvermoon Village had definitely crossed the bottom line of the Lingu Valley. Not only for their dignity, but also for their survival in the future. The Lingu Valley had to fight back. This was also the thought of the entire village. The village chief and the deputy village chief gathered all the villagers who could fight together. These villagers were actually the large groups that took turns to hunt. Except for those who were injured, all of them gathered together. Then, the village chief and the deputy village chief reorganized them in batches. There were more than 2,500 people in total. They were divided into 8 teams, each with about 300 people. After the team was reorganized, the old village chief led everyone to a smooth stone wall at the back of the valley. Then, he formed a hand seal and chanted an incantation, causing a cave entrance to appear on the stone wall. All the Lingu Valley cultivators, including Xiaolingyu, were dressed in standard metal armor. They entered the relatively spacious cave one after another and proceeded forward slowly. Everyone's expression was very solemn, because this time, they were not going out to hunt, but to fight. This was something that had not happened for many years. The defensive power of the metal armor was actually not very strong. It was just an ordinary low-grade defensive artifact. However, these cultivators did not have a strong physical body like Xiaolingyu, so the low-grade defensive artifact was still very useful for them. Before they reached the end of the cave, there were already 8 forks. Each team of 300 people chose a fork and continued forward. To Xiaolingyu's surprise, the deputy village chief stayed with her team. Needless to say, most of the cultivators in this team were definitely on the deputy village chief's side. Soon, they reached the end of the forked cave. After everyone worked together to push aside a huge rock, they saw very dense shrubs intertwined together, blocking the exit. The deputy village chief took the lead and used a sharp sword to cut the shrubs apart. Everyone followed behind him and left the cave. After everyone left the cave, the deputy village chief used a spell to move the shrubs back to their original positions and restored them to their original state. There was no abnormality at all, so naturally, they could not see the cave hidden under the shrubs. With everyone gathered together, the cultivators of Silvermoon Village would definitely not act rashly. Therefore, this time, the Lingu Valley cultivators needed to search for the cultivators of Silvermoon Village. Then, they would learn from the cultivators of Silvermoon Village and quietly approach the enemy, then suddenly launch a sneak attack. Therefore, whether this mission would be effective or not depended on whether they could find the cultivators of Silvermoon Village. Furthermore, they had to surround and kill them in the dense forest before they noticed and retreated. To search for the enemy's tracks, they naturally could not gather everyone together. They could only send people to search in all directions. The deputy village chief was in this team, so the responsibility of leading the team naturally fell to him. Of course, he also had the authority to divide the work among everyone. Under the deputy village chief's instructions, Xiaolingyu and the other 7 cultivators were selected. the 8 of them would split up to search for the enemy's tracks. Xiaolingyu did not raise any objections. Instead, he chose a direction and quietly snuck away. This kind of search was actually very dangerous because the enemy was not here to hunt, but to surround and kill the cultivators of the Linggu Valley. Therefore, they would also send people to search in all directions. Their team would also be very careful. When the team stopped or moved, they would definitely send people to guard the area. If Xiaolingyu and the other Linggu Valley scouts were careless, they could be discovered by the enemy. Then, there was an 80 to 90% chance that they would not be able to return alive. Moreover, there were countless wolf demons in this dense forest. If the cultivators moved alone in the dense forest and encountered a large group of wolf demons, it would also be difficult for them to escape. Many times, inexperienced cultivators would only die if they moved alone in the dense forest. The deputy village chief clearly knew that Xiaolingyu had just joined the Linggu Valley, but still sent him out to investigate. It was most likely that he wanted Xiaolingyu to die. Xiaolingyu was not afraid of being discovered by the enemy. He was also not afraid of the wolf demons in the dense forest. Therefore, while he was careful, he moved much faster and could search a wider area. No matter what, Xiaolingyu was already a villager of the Linggu Valley. Even if he did not have much feelings for the Linggu Valley, at least under the current circumstances, he definitely had to stand on the side of the Linggu Valley. Since he had decided to stand on this side, Xiaolingyu would do his best to do what he should do. This had always been his principle. While moving through the dense forest, Xiaolingyu often encountered wolf demons. However, those wolf demons could not stop him at all, let alone cause him harm. In fact, if he was accidentally surrounded by a large group of wolf demons, it was not his misfortune, but the wolf demon's misfortune. He did not mind replenishing his meat while carrying out his mission. Moreover, Xiaolingyu's condition deteriorated much slower than that of an ordinary Great Soul stage cultivator. He did not need to eat once every 20 hours. This could save him time and maximize his chances of being discovered by the enemy. Xiaolingyu could go days and nights without eating, but other Great Soul stage cultivators could not. They had to stop and eat once in a while, which also made it easier for Xiaolingyu to search. 3 days after Xiaolingyu left the group, he finally found a group of silver-armored cultivators. Just as Xiaolingyu discovered them, the cultivator in charge of guarding the group also discovered him. Therefore, before he could do anything, the others had already raised their guard and quickly moved towards him. There were more than 100 people on the other side, and they had just finished eating. They were all in good condition. Although Xiaolingyu was not afraid of them, he was not in the mood to fight alone. He quickly retreated while sending a message to the deputy village chief. According to the previous agreement, after receiving the message, the deputy village chief would bring people or send people to surround and kill the enemy. However, Xiaolingyu led this group of silver-armored cultivators around the dense forest for nearly a day, but no large group of cultivators from the Linggu Valley came. Xiaolingyu could guess that it was not that the deputy village chief did not receive his message, but that his message had been ignored. Xiaolingyu could actually shake off this group of silver-armored cultivators at any time, but he felt that giving up now would not only be a waste of his time and effort, but also a waste of an opportunity. Therefore, he still appeared in the vicinity of this group of silver-armored cultivators from time to time, allowing them to chase after him. Xiaolingyu contacted a Linggu Valley villager in his group that he was familiar with. From this, he was able to determine the exact location of his group. Therefore, he led this group of silver-armored cultivators closer to the group. "If you don't take the initiative to come over, I will directly lead the enemy to you." With this thought in mind, Xiaolingyu circled around the dense forest with this group of silver-armored cultivators. This group of silver-armored cultivators also had their own mission. They also knew that their group could not be led by a single person, but that person would always appear and constantly harass them. They had no choice but to chase after him every time. Moreover, this group of silver-armored cultivators felt that their position had been exposed, so they had to constantly change their position. It would be best if they could kill that person to prevent that person from exposing their group's position. In this way, Xiaolingyu was able to lead this group of silver-armored cultivators. After all, the group led by the deputy village chief was constantly moving, so Xiaolingyu's route was not a straight line. This could also reduce the group of silver-armored cultivators' suspicions. After circling around for nearly a month, Xiaolingyu finally led this group of silver-armored cultivators to the vicinity of the deputy village chief's group. Then, he sent a message to the deputy village chief and also sent the same warning to his familiar teammates. The enemy was not far away, so the deputy village chief naturally could not ignore Xiaolingyu's message. Therefore, he led 300 people to surround Xiaolingyu. When the group of silver-armored cultivators saw the Linggu Valley's group, they knew that they had fallen into a trap. Therefore, they immediately retreated. However, at this moment, Xiaolingyu blocked their path and repeatedly blasted out primal chaos seals at them. The battle of 300 against 100 began. The Linggu Valley had the advantage in numbers, and with experts like Xiaolingyu and the deputy village chief, the 100 or so silver-armored cultivators were naturally unable to resist. In the end, only one person was lucky enough to escape. The rest of the silver-armored cultivators were all killed on the spot. Of the 300 people from the Linggu Valley, 5 died and 30 were injured. In comparison, the price paid was very small. Chapter 507. Xiaolingyu only smiled and brushed off the deputy village chief's words and attitude. He didn't want any rewards, he just wanted to do something for the Linggu Valley so that when he asked the old village chief for the map in the future, the old village chief would readily agree. The Linggu Valley's operation ended very quickly, because the silver-armored cultivators from Silvermoon Village had already been alerted to the Linggu Valley's counterattack. They either escaped or went into hiding, making it difficult for the Linggu Valley's brigades to find another opportunity. However, other than Xiaolingyu's brigade, only 2 other brigades managed to find the cultivators from Silvermoon Village. In other words, the Linggu Valley had mobilized 8 brigades of 300 people, but in reality, they had only fought 3 battles. Other than Xiaolingyu's brigade, which had achieved complete victory, the other 2 brigades had each killed more than 50 silver-armored cultivators. The number of people who had died in the Linggu Valley was actually about the same as the number of people who had died in Silvermoon Village. This time, Silvermoon Village had brazenly attacked the Linggu Valley, but neither side had gained any advantage. They had only lost a few hundred villagers for nothing. The people of the Linggu Valley couldn't be sure whether the cultivators from Silvermoon Village had already retreated, but for the sake of their livelihood, they had to continue hunting. However, the number of people in each hunting team in the Linggu Valley had to be above 100. The harvest of a 100-man team in a month was actually less than that of 3 teams of 30 people, because the hunting range of a 100-man team was actually about the same as that of a team of 30 people. In this way, the rate of meat replenishment in the Linggu Valley would greatly decrease. This was definitely not a long-term solution. However, any village, or any large team, would definitely have some savings. The Linggu Valley was naturally the same, so the Linggu Valley could still hold on for a while. In the eyes of the villagers of the Linggu Valley, Silvermoon Village had also suffered. They knew that the Linggu Valley wasn't a weakling that they could bully. Silvermoon Village probably wouldn't dare to casually attack the Linggu Valley again, so the 100-man team's helplessness shouldn't last for too long. However, Silvermoon Village didn't seem to be prepared to give up. After 2 months, a 100-man team that went out to hunt in the Linggu Valley was once again attacked by a large group of silver-armored cultivators. This team of 100 people from the Linggu Valley only sent out a message, but not a single person returned alive. This proved that the enemy's numbers far exceeded theirs. The villagers of the Linggu Valley were once again enraged. More than 2,000 villagers wearing iron armor, under the lead of the old village chief and deputy village chief, silently left the Linggu Valley through a secret passage. They went to the dense forest to find the cultivators of Silvermoon Village and settle the score. However, Silvermoon Village seemed to have already predicted that the Linggu Valley would retaliate. The 2,000 people from the Linggu Valley searched bitterly for nearly 3 months, but still couldn't find a trace of the Silvermoon Village cultivators. The Linggu Valley's iron-armored cultivators could only dejectedly return to the village. In a secret room, dozens of Lingu Valley cultivators gathered together. These cultivators were the stewards of large families or large teams. They were also the more prestigious people in the village. If this continues, not only will our meat replenishment be a problem, but our manpower will also gradually be depleted, the deputy village chief said worriedly. Does anyone have a good idea? The old village chief asked everyone. Everyone frowned. It seemed that they didn't have a good idea to solve this problem. Xiaolingyu, Kan Ping, and Yueru were all present, but the three of them didn't have any intention of speaking. They really didn't have a good idea. If there's no better idea, then we can only use their own methods against them, the deputy village chief said with narrowed eyes. Oh, the old village chief was a little confused. If Silvermoon Village can do this to us, then we can also do the same to them. They can keep watch near our village and wait for an opportunity to surround and kill our villagers. Why can't we keep watch outside their village? It's not like they don't need to hunt, the deputy village chief said with a cold smile. When everyone heard this, they felt that it made sense and silently nodded. The old village chief pondered for a moment and said, if we don't send enough people, I'm afraid we'll be counterattacked. If we send too many people, our valley will be defenseless. If they take advantage of this opportunity to invade, or if a large group of wolf demons and flying beasts attack like last time, our valley will most likely be breached. We were able to leave the valley previously because we didn't go far. If the village encounters an emergency, we can quickly rush back to help. However, Silvermoon Village is still a little far from our Lingu Valley. But other than this method, what else can we do? Do we continue to watch as the villagers are continuously surrounded and killed? Or do we use a large team of 1,000 people to hunt in the future? The deputy village chief asked repeatedly. Everyone fell into silence. I think we should vote on it, the deputy village chief suddenly suggested after everyone was silent for a while. The Lingu Valley did have an old rule, and that was, when people didn't agree, they would vote to reach a consensus. This vote seemed to be the most reasonable choice. At this moment, Xiaolingyu interrupted and said, I feel that there are still many suspicious points in this matter. For example, why did Silvermoon Village suddenly attack our Lingu Valley? For example, how many people do they have around our village? We should clarify these suspicious points before deciding on the next course of action. The best strategy is to plan before acting. Xiaolingyu's words made Yueru and Kan Ping secretly nod their heads. However, many of the other Lingu Valley cultivators frowned. These cultivators frowned not because Xiaolingyu's words were unreasonable, but because he had just joined the Lingu Valley not long ago. It was not easy for these people in charge of the Lingu Valley to accept him speaking in this kind of situation. They were used to listening to the village chief and deputy village chief's arrangements. They didn't want to speak and didn't like to listen to others speak. Xiaolingyu's words are reasonable. However, how would we know what Silvermoon Village is thinking? How many people they have around our village is definitely a highly confidential matter. It's not easy to find out. Previously, we had thought of capturing the people from Silvermoon Village alive. Unfortunately, even if we did, they would immediately commit suicide. The deputy village chief shook his head as he spoke. Since no one liked what he said, Xiaolingyu didn't have the heart to say more. In the end, they voted. Although Xiaolingyu and a few others voted against it, as they didn't want a large number of Lingu Valley villagers to take the risk, most of the people in the room still felt that they had to go to Silvermoon Village to attack them. In everyone's opinion, the Lingu Valley didn't know Silvermoon Village's motive. They also didn't know how many people they had near their village. How would they know when the Lingu Valley would be empty? How would they know how many people the Lingu Valley had sent out this time? Other than the injured, there were less than 2,300 villagers left in Lin Valley Village who used to go hunting. For safety's sake, the old village chief left 500 men to guard the village and only took 1,800 men with him. Silvermoon Village was indeed quite far from the Lingu Valley. However, with the experienced old village chief leading the team, everyone took a safer route. Although they took some detours, they weren't attacked by large groups of demon beasts along the way. Therefore, their speed was very fast. However, even so, it took nearly 2 months for the 1,800 Lingu Valley cultivators to reach the dense forest beside Silvermoon Village. On the way here, the old village chief and deputy village chief naturally kept in contact with the Lingu Valley. As long as there was any movement, everyone would immediately turn back. Silvermoon Village wasn't in the valley. Instead, it was on the peak of a mountain that was only 500 feet tall. The peak of the mountain wasn't flat. The villagers of Silvermoon Village all lived in caves on the peak of the mountain. At the highest point of the mountain, there was a very strange-looking boulder. The boulder was silver in color and shaped like a crescent moon. It would even emit a silver-white fluorescence at night. Thus, the mountain was named Silvermoon Mountain, and the village at the top of the mountain was named Silvermoon Village. Silvermoon Mountain wasn't tall, but the mountain was very large. Although Silvermoon Village was on the peak, its overall size was definitely bigger than the Lingu Valley's valley. Not far from the foot of Silvermoon Mountain, there was a large river that flowed endlessly. The river's flow was very fast and the river was tens of thousands of feet wide. The rumbling of the water was like a series of thunder. Even from afar, one could hear it clearly. It was really unknown whether the sound of the water had any effect on the lives and cultivation of the cultivators in Silvermoon Village. The river originally flowed straight, but when it reached Silvermoon Mountain, it suddenly turned 90 degrees. This caused both sides of Silvermoon Mountain to face the river. On the opposite side of Silvermoon Mountain was a very vast forest. It was also an important hunting area for Silvermoon Village. The cultivators of Silvermoon Village couldn't fly across the river, and there was no bridge over the river. The cultivators of Silvermoon Village could only cross by boat. At this moment, the cultivators of the Lingu Valley could see from afar that there were about 10 small boats on the river. They were quickly sailing towards the opposite side of the river. There were many wolf demons on the other side of the river, but they had to travel a long way to find them. The nearby wolf demons had already been mostly killed by the cultivators of Silvermoon Village. Under normal circumstances, the cultivators of Silvermoon Village would go to the opposite side of the river to hunt. If the Lingu Valley wanted to take revenge on Silvermoon Village and kill the cultivators of Silvermoon Village, they had to cross the river. The old village chief then led everyone along the river, with their backs facing Silvermoon Mountain. After traveling for almost a day, the old village chief finally stopped. Then, he took out the boat-shaped magic treasure that he had prepared long ago and led everyone across the river. When they reached the forest, the old village chief and the deputy village chief split everyone into 6 teams of 300 people, and let everyone search for their own targets. In less than 10 days of searching in this forest, they had only killed a few dozen villagers of Silvermoon Village. However, the old village chief received a message from the village. Chapter 508. There were only 500 cultivators left in the Lingu Valley who had some fighting experience. The rest were women and children who hadn't reached the Great Divinity stage. There were more than 4,000 people left in the Lingu Valley, but their combined fighting power was estimated to be less than 2,000 silver-armored cultivators. If they fought head-on, they wouldn't be a match for 3,000 silver-armored cultivators. Fortunately, the Lingu Valley's terrain was special. It was easy to defend and difficult to attack. It wouldn't be easy for the enemy to kill their way in. After the village head and deputy village head received the news, they first gathered all the cultivators they had brought out and rushed back at full speed. On the way back, Shaolin Yu reminded the village head and deputy village head that it was very likely that it was too late to return now. It was better to find another way to resolve this matter. After all, even if they traveled at full speed, it would take them at least 40 days to return. If the silver-armored cultivators were really determined to break into the Lingu Valley, it wouldn't even take 40 days. The village head and deputy village head naturally asked Shaolin Yu if he had any good ideas. Shaolin Yu thought of a story from Earth. Besiege Wei to rescue Zhao. Therefore, he suggested that the 1,800 armored cultivators feign an attack on Silvermoon Village and act as if they were going to die together, forcing the silver-armored cultivators to come back and save themselves. However, this suggestion was rejected by the deputy village head. He even berated Xiaolingyu for gambling with the lives of his fellow villagers. If the silver-armored cultivators didn't come back, the 1,800 armored cultivators would completely lose the chance to save the Linggu Valley. Furthermore, the deputy village head felt that the 1,800 armored cultivators alone wouldn't be a threat to the safety of Silvermoon Village. He even asserted that there were at least 2,000 silver-armored cultivators guarding the village. The deputy village head was very certain, and his words weren't without reason. Naturally, Xiaolingyu's suggestion wasn't taken seriously. Xiaolingyu was only doing his part and offering a strategy. He didn't expect the village head and deputy village head to really listen to him, so he didn't say anything else. In Xiaolingyu's opinion, even if there were still 2,000 silver-armored cultivators in Silvermoon Village, as long as there weren't any heavenly divinity experts among them, he would be able to break through Silvermoon Village's defensive line with his 1,800 armored cultivators. After traveling day and night for half a month, the armored cultivators in Linggu Valley had already covered half of the distance. Everyone was a little tired. Xiaolingyu suggested that they should take a proper rest, or else, even if they made it back in time. Otherwise, even if they were to return in time, they would still be in their condition and would be defeated. Tease. As the only medicine master in Linggu Valley, Yueru naturally had to follow the army. After all, there would be casualties in battle and they needed her timely and effective treatment. Actually, what I'm most worried about is that we're traveling at such a fast speed. Moreover, there are too few people patrolling the road ahead. It's very easy for us to fall into the enemy's ambush, Xiaolingyu said to Yueru after he was pulled aside. The village head should be able to think of this. Don't worry about it. Don't offend the deputy village head. Yueru kindly advised. It's not that I want to go against anyone. It's just that I've always been so passive. It doesn't feel good. Xiaolingyu said worriedly. Don't worry, there won't be any problems. Yueru, who wasn't very calculative, seemed to always be this optimistic. Xiaolingyu, on the other hand, was not optimistic. His intuition told him that something big was going to happen in Linggu Valley this time. After thinking carefully, Xiaolingyu greeted Yueru and took the initiative to go to the front of the army to take charge of scouting and guarding. Originally, there were only 3 armored cultivators who were sent to the front to scout. They were sent to the front and the 2 sides to scout. Furthermore, they were only 40 to 50 miles away from the main army. The area they could scout was very small and the enemy could easily avoid or discover them. Xiaolingyu was very fast, so the area he could move around was very large. He wasn't an expert in scouting and guarding, so he could only move quickly and expand the area he could scout. 2 days passed. Xiaolingyu didn't discover anything unusual. However, when he stopped to eat and rest, 4 rays of light suddenly flew towards him. It was obvious that he had been exposed. Furthermore, the enemy had deliberately waited for him to be in a bad state to attack. For many low-level cultivators in the realm of the gods, they were at their worst when they stopped to eat. Xiaolingyu's condition wasn't actually deteriorating. He had calculated that his condition would deteriorate in 4 hours, so he stopped to eat. A cautious person like him wouldn't wait until his condition started to deteriorate to replenish his energy. The 4 rays of light were arrows shot from crossbows. In the blink of an eye, they were in front of Xiaolingyu. However, Xiaolingyu suddenly rose from the ground and the 4 rays of light exploded at his feet. What surprised Xiaolingyu was that there should have been 4 people on the other side, but after they shot the 4 arrows, they actually fled. He didn't know if it was because they were too confident in these 4 arrows, or if they originally had the attitude of retreating if they didn't attack. Xiaolingyu quickly moved around and searched carefully. However, he still couldn't find the cultivator who had shot the arrows at him. Whether it was the shape or the material of the 4 arrows, they were exactly the same as the arrows used by the silver-armored cultivators. Therefore, he was almost certain that these arrows were from Silvermoon Village. In other words, there were people from Silvermoon Village nearby. The ones who had shot the arrows were probably their scouts. There were 4 people on guard in one direction. There must be a lot of people in their team. Xiao Yu immediately sent a message to the village chief and continued to investigate. Not long after, the village chief replied to Xiao Yu and asked him to slowly retreat while continuing to investigate. This was because the Linggu Valley team was preparing to take a detour to avoid the possible ambush ahead. This time, the Linggu Valley team finally trusted Xiao Yu. However, Xiao Yu didn't expect that less than a day after he slowly retreated and hadn't returned to the team, the village chief sent a message that the team had been attacked and asked Xiao Yu to hurry back to support them. After receiving the message, Xiao Yu temporarily put down his guard and rushed back at full speed. After 6 hours, he finally found the Linggu Valley team that had taken a detour. However, the situation of the Linggu Valley team was very bad. They had already been forced into a small rift valley by more than 2,000 silver-armored cultivators. They could only rely on the narrow entrance of the rift valley, which made it easy to defend and difficult to attack. However, they couldn't fight their way out. What made Xiao Yu even more depressed was that as soon as he rushed to the entrance of the rift valley to help the cultivators on his side, more than 2,000 silver-armored cultivators followed him and charged over. Furthermore, it gave people the illusion that these 2,000 silver-armored cultivators were brought over by Xiao Yu. As for why these 2,000 silver-armored cultivators would follow him closely, Xiao Yu felt that it was definitely a coincidence. However, Xiao Yu didn't think too much about it. He just waved the silver moon broken sword and charged into the enemy's group, approaching the entrance of the rift valley step by step. Although Xiao Yu was also in the Great Soul stage, his overall strength was very strong and his body's defense was very high. The opponent's weapons couldn't break through his skin at all. He advanced at an extremely fast speed as if there was no one around and quickly rushed to the entrance of the rift valley. However, what he didn't expect was that as soon as he reached the entrance of the rift valley, not only did the Linggu Valley cultivators in charge of guarding the entrance not let him in, they even shot a dozen sharp iron arrows at him. As he didn't expect this, he didn't have time to dodge. After all, the distance was too close. These dozen iron arrows all landed on Xiao Yu's body. Although they didn't penetrate his body and even made him feel a little pain, he was still angry. He had done his best for Lin Valley Village and had even rushed in to help at a time like this. How could they shoot arrows at him? Even if they didn't shoot at him on purpose and had only accidentally shot him when they were killing those silver-armored cultivators, why would those dozens of iron arrows be aimed at him? Although Xiao Yu was angry, he would never lose his mind in the middle of a fight. Therefore, he didn't rush into the Rift Valley to settle the score with the Linggu Valley cultivators. Instead, he directly turned around and rushed out of the battlefield. There were almost 5,000 silver-armored cultivators blocking the entrance of the Rift Valley, but they still couldn't kill Xiao Yu because Xiao Yu was in their group. They couldn't launch a collective attack for fear of accidentally injuring people from the same village. Therefore, Xiao Yu easily killed his way out of the battlefield. Perhaps because they saw Xiao Yu's power, those silver-armored cultivators didn't send anyone to kill Xiao Yu. After Xiao Yu killed his way out, he didn't leave. Instead, he jumped onto a big tree and watched quietly from afar. At the same time, he was thinking. Not long after, Xiao Yu had already thought of something. Those 2,000 silver-armored cultivators who arrived at the same time as him must have been lying in ambush on the path of the Linggu Valley army. They were waiting for the Linggu Valley cultivators to fall into their ambush. However, after receiving his warning, the Linggu Valley cultivators decided to take a detour, causing their ambush to be useless. The 2,000 silver-armored cultivators who arrived later should be part of the 3,000 silver-armored cultivators who attacked the Linggu Valley. As for the 2,000 silver-armored cultivators who blocked the Linggu Valley army in the Rift Valley earlier, they should be from Silvermoon Village, which was stationed at Silvermoon Mountain. This group of silver-armored cultivators might have received news that the Linggu Valley people had surrounded and killed the villagers who were out hunting. It was even more likely that they had planned this beforehand. The people from Silvermoon Village had used a series of plans. Now, it seemed that their goal was to eliminate the main force of the Linggu Valley army. Furthermore, the current situation was extremely advantageous to them. They weren't far from success. Xiaolingyu felt that there must be someone in Silvermoon Village who was very good at scheming. Their plan was almost flawless, and Lingu Village had been completely tricked by them. They had been led by the nose all along. Just now, the people from the Lingu Valley had shot arrows at them, probably because they had chosen to take a detour due to the warning he had given them. However, after taking a detour, they had fallen into an ambush. However, what Xiaolingyu didn't understand was that since they had taken a detour, the Lingu Valley army should have had many choices. Why had they chosen to fall into an ambush? Chapter 509. Although the Lingu Valley had fewer people, they were still defending the entrance of the Rift Valley. The entrance was very narrow and could only fit 3 or 4 people side by side. This made it impossible for the silver-armored cultivators to show their advantage in numbers, at least in a short period of time. In the beginning, both sides used crossbows to shoot at each other, but these crossbows would eventually be used up. The silver-armored cultivators charged forward with silver shields for a while, but they couldn't break through the enemy's defenses no matter how hard they tried. So they retreated a little and stopped attacking. After some adjustments, a portion of the silver-armored cultivators blocked the entrance of the Rift Valley, while the rest climbed to the top of the 2 sides of the Rift Valley. The silver-armored cultivators at the entrance of the Rift Valley only stared and got into formation. Meanwhile, the silver-armored cultivators at the top of the 2 sides of the Rift Valley continuously threw down boulders and shot down arrows. The Lingu Valley cultivators looked like they had nothing to worry about, but in reality, they were like turtles in a jar. This was because there was no way out of this Rift Valley. They were surrounded by steep cliffs on all sides, and there was only a very narrow exit in front of them. But now, it was completely blocked. Fortunately, the interior of the Rift Valley was quite spacious. The Lingu Valley cultivators could easily dodge the boulders and arrows that came from the top of the Rift Valley. At this time, the Lingu Valley cultivators at the entrance of the Rift Valley were already having a hard time maintaining their defensive formation. They also needed to dodge the boulders and arrows. The silver-armored cultivators blocking the entrance of the valley only needed to launch a few waves of attacks to break into the Rift Valley, but they didn't do so. In the end, the silver-armored cultivators at the top of the 2 sides of the Rift Valley didn't throw down any more boulders and arrows. They just stared at the Lingu Valley cultivators in the Rift Valley. The Lin Valley Village's cultivators could guess that the silver-armored cultivators were preparing to trap them inside. After all, they had no supplies now, and the meat they brought with them would run out one day. When that time came, the Lin Valley Village's army would starve to death in the Rift Valley without the need for the silver-armored cultivators to do anything. The silver-armored cultivators wanted to destroy the Lingu Valley army at the smallest cost. This way, the Lingu Valley's main fighting force would be reduced by half, and Silvermoon Village would be able to do whatever they wanted to the Lingu Valley. The cultivators of the Lingu Valley had thought of digging a cave or a tunnel to escape, but their every move was under the surveillance of the enemy. They had no chance to dig a tunnel or a cave. As long as they made the slightest move, the silver-armored cultivators outside would rush to the entrance of the valley, and boulders and arrows would continuously fall from the top of the valley on both sides. The Lingu Valley troops were already in a desperate situation. A few days later, the silver-armored cultivators outside and at the top of the Rift Valley began to shout loudly for the people of the Lingu Valley to give up resistance. Those who surrendered would be spared from death if they walked out of the Rift Valley one by one. In such a desperate situation, the other party was willing to surrender. Naturally, many Lingu Valley cultivators were moved. The old village chief naturally wouldn't surrender, but he didn't object to others surrendering. What surprised everyone was that the deputy village chief, who usually acted like a tyrant in the Lingu Valley, also expressed that he wouldn't surrender. He even said that they weren't truly at a dead end, and that there was still hope. After some consideration, nearly 300 people really did choose to surrender. They slowly walked towards the entrance of the Rift Valley. These cultivators who chose to surrender were basically all alone. To them, it didn't matter which village they were in. Furthermore, there wasn't much in the Lingu Valley that they cared about. The silver-armored cultivators actually accepted the surrender of these 300 people, but only temporarily sealed their cultivation. In the next few days, the silver-armored cultivators continued to shout, and dozens of Lingu Valley villagers walked out of the Rift Valley one after another. After all, they had run out of meat. If they didn't surrender, they would only starve to death. At this juncture, the deputy village chief changed his mind. He advised the old village chief to temporarily surrender with everyone and not make unnecessary sacrifices. There was already no hope. "All of you, go out. I won't surrender. Even if I surrender, they won't let me go. After all, I'm the village chief," the old village chief said tiredly. "If the village chief doesn't surrender, we won't surrender either. We'll fight to the death with the old village chief. At least we'll die a worthy death," the deputy village chief said righteously after a moment of hesitation. The deputy village chief had brought many people with him. Even if the deputy village chief didn't surrender, these people didn't surrender either. It was as if they would live and die with the deputy village chief and the people of the Lingu Valley. The old village chief naturally had many villagers who were loyal to him. Many of them had gone hunting with the old village chief before, and most of them had been saved by the old village chief. Thus, at this moment, they stood firmly by the old village chief's side. It was precisely because the old village chief had so many strong and loyal villagers by his side that his position in Lin Valley Village was so secure. Even though the deputy village chief had many subordinates and relatives, he never dared to challenge the old village chief. Since no one is willing to surrender, then let's eat the last remaining meat. After eating, we'll break out with all our might. Even if we die, we'll at least drag a few of them down with us. The old village chief took out some fresh wolf meat from his storage magic treasure and distributed it to everyone as he spoke. When the deputy village chief heard this, his expression changed slightly. His eyes flickered slightly, and no one knew what he was thinking. Just as the old village chief and the other Lingu Valley cultivators were preparing to eat, Xiaolingyu, who was on a large tree not far from the Rift Valley, suddenly discovered a group of no more than 500 armored cultivators quietly approaching. Xiaolingyu recognized this group of armored cultivators. They were the main fighting force left behind in the Lingu Valley. They had obviously come here to rescue the old village chief and the other Lingu Valley cultivators. However, how would these 400 people be able to rescue the Lin Valley village cultivators who were trapped in the valley? Their arrival was just sending them to their deaths. These 400 people didn't directly charge over. Instead, they first observed the situation, and then several leaders began to discuss. Attacking forcefully was definitely not possible, but there was almost no chance of winning either. After all, they were too few in number and simply couldn't influence the overall situation. They couldn't come to a decision, so naturally, they sent a message to the old village chief to ask for countermeasures. The old village chief's reply was to quickly leave and return to the Lingu Valley to help evacuate the villagers, and not to make unnecessary sacrifices. The old village chief also told these Lingu Valley cultivators outside that they had decided to break out at night. And just as these leaders continued to discuss countermeasures, Xiaolingyu arrived in front of this group of cultivators, but he was surrounded by dozens of cultivators. The leaders walked over. They all recognized Xiaolingyu. To be precise, there were few villagers in the entire Lingu Valley who didn't recognize Xiaolingyu. This was because he had once saved Kong Ping from the high platform in the square in front of the entire village. However, Xiaolingyu, who was originally very admired by many villagers, now made these armored cultivators and the leaders very wary. The old village chief and the deputy village chief sent a message saying that you're a spy from Silvermoon Village. "How dare you come here?" one of the leaders said coldly. "When I joined the Lingu Valley, I also made a vow. If I were a spy, if I had done anything to betray the Lingu Valley, my soul would have long dissipated," Xiaolingyu said calmly. Hearing this, the leaders frowned slightly. The soul oaths of cultivators in the realm of the gods were also very effective. Cultivators didn't dare to violate soul oaths at all, and if they did, their souls would dissipate. The fact that Xiaoling Yu was able to stand here unscathed was enough to prove that he wasn't a spy, and that he hadn't done anything to betray the Linggu Valley. Perhaps you have some special method to nullify soul oaths. In any case, the old village chief and the deputy village chief definitely wouldn't accuse you unjustly. One of the leaders didn't know how to refute this, so he could only reply this way. Let's hear what he wants from us first, another leader interjected. Everyone stared at Xiaoling Yu, the sharp blades in their hands glinting coldly. I'm only here to ask everyone a question. Are you determined to save the old village chief and the others in the Rift Valley? Xiaoling Yu asked. Nonsense, if not to save them, why would we come here? One of the leaders said straightforwardly. Alright, since that's the case, you can follow me and charge over. Of course, I can charge at the front, Xiaoling Yu said calmly. Follow you? The leaders were very hesitant, and clearly didn't believe Xiaoling Yu. Stay behind me. If I don't try my best to kill the enemy, you can all attack me together. I won't joke around with my life, Xiaoling Yu said. The leaders pondered for a while, and then one of them said, You can lead the charge, but not now. Xiaoling Yu asked, Then when? One of the leaders said, You don't need to know that. When the time comes, you're only responsible for charging at the front and opening the way for us. Xiaoling Yu knew that they didn't really believe him, so he didn't ask any more questions. He just crossed his arms in front of his chest and leaned against a tree, waiting patiently. At midnight, the originally peaceful entrance of the Rift Valley suddenly heard sounds of fighting. Xiaoling Yu looked up and saw streaks of flames flickering at the entrance of the Rift Valley. The sharp sounds of swords clashing and the deafening battle cries intertwined, and the thick smell of blood spread from there. Many wolf demons gradually gathered here, but when they sensed the commotion over there, they all turned around and fled. Brothers, let's charge together and save the old village chief. One of the leaders shouted, and then charged toward the exit of the Rift Valley, forgetting that Xiaoling Yu was leading the way. Even if they forgot, Xiaoling Yu would still charge at the front, because he had to attract the enemy's firepower and minimize the casualties of the hundreds of armored Linggu Valley cultivators. Chapter 510. The wings of extreme speed had already appeared behind Xiaoling Yu. He turned into a streak of silver light and arrived at the front of the group in a flash. Then, he gradually pulled away from the group and shot towards the silver-armored cultivators at the entrance of the Rift Valley like an arrow released from a bow. The silver-armored cultivators were originally facing the entrance of the Rift Valley, and their attention should have been focused on the iron-armored cultivators who were trying their best to break out of the encirclement. However, when the battle cries sounded from behind them, 1,000 of them turned around in an orderly manner and shot their prepared crossbows at the 400 or so iron-armored cultivators of the Linggu Valley. Xiaoling Yu ignored the rain of crossbow bolts and approached the silver-armored cultivators without slowing down in the slightest. The iron-armored cultivators stopped at the same time and raised their shields high above their heads, forming a steel fortress and continuing to advance. The silver-armored cultivators who were originally at the top of the two sides of the Rift Valley quickly descended towards the entrance of the Rift Valley. Although it was the middle of the night and this was a sudden attack, the silver-armored cultivators seemed to have expected this. Not only were they in an orderly formation, but their speed of gathering and counterattacking was also very fast. In almost a dozen breaths of time, all the silver-armored cultivators were blocking the entrance of the Rift Valley. 3,000 of them faced the entrance of the Rift Valley while nearly 2,000 of them had their backs to it. The two groups of silver-armored cultivators only stood firm and didn't move at all. Their shields and silver armor made their formation seem like an unbreakable fortress made of silver. The silver-armored cultivators facing the entrance of the Rift Valley were in a crescent formation. They constantly bombarded the entrance of the Rift Valley. Any Supreme Divinity cultivator who entered the area of their bombardment would be instantly killed. Apart from a Supreme Divinity cultivator like Xiaoling Yu, who could withstand a round of bombardment from hundreds of Supreme Divinity cultivators at the same time. Xiaoling Yu was currently facing the bombardment of nearly 2,000 silver-armored cultivators. Although there were only 200 or so attacks that could hit Xiaoling Yu, it was enough to instantly kill any Supreme Divinity cultivator. However, what shocked the silver-armored cultivators was that their attacks didn't have any lethality apart from temporarily slowing down the silver figure's advance. At this moment, the cultivators with their backs to the entrance of the Rift Valley had a strange feeling. At this moment, the one who was pouncing towards them was not a great god, but a heavenly god that they could only look up to but not reach. This was only the beginning. After a few flashes, Xiaoling Yu quickly arrived in front of the silver-armored cultivators. Under the incredulous gazes of the dozens of silver-armored cultivators, she viciously punched a silver shield. Bang! With a loud explosion, the silver shield that was close to a medium-quality god artifact actually exploded. The cultivator holding the silver shield was unable to withstand the tremendous force, and his body instantly exploded like the shield. After the punch, Xiaoling Yu quickly moved to the side and arrived in front of another silver shield. She also threw a punch. Another silver shield shattered, and another silver-armored cultivator exploded. At this moment, many silver-armored cultivators were thinking, how did he do it? Could he really be a god? Stop him! Maintain the formation. One of the silver-armored cultivators shouted a warning. Thus, when Xiaoling Yu threw a third punch, the silver-armored cultivators snapped out of their daze and slashed or stabbed at Xiaoling Yu with their weapons. Xiaoling Yu didn't care about the defenses behind him or to his left and right. He suddenly reached out and caught all the incoming weapons with his arm. With a soft shout, the weapons all changed shape. At the same time, dozens of weapons struck Xiaoling Yu's body. Unfortunately, none of them could break through his body's defense. Xiaoling Yu's body was a peak medium-quality divine artifact. Even a high-quality divine artifact might not be able to break through it, let alone the low-quality divine artifacts in the silver-armored cultivator's hands. On a small mountain about 300 feet away from the entrance of the Rift Valley, a cultivator in brocade robes was staring in the direction of the entrance. The cultivator in brocade robes also saw Xiaoling Yu, but he didn't look too surprised. He only frowned slightly. This person didn't look very old, but he was rather tall and well-proportioned. His face was as gentle as jade, and his eyes shone brightly. One could tell at a glance that he was no ordinary person. Behind this person were two women with swords in their hands. The two women were naturally beautiful, and they were dressed in tight robes that made them appear valiant and formidable. They stood behind the man, probably because their status wasn't as high as his. However, they didn't look like servant girls, but more like female bodyguards. Third young master, this person should be a god. Should we take care of him? One of the women asked, holding her sword. The young man didn't immediately respond. Instead, he pondered for a moment, then said, he's not a god. How is that possible? The two women were extremely astonished. I also think it's quite inconceivable. A great divinity cultivator can kill nearly 2,000 great divinities as if he's invincible. The man rubbed his nose and smiled. The two women frowned, but didn't respond. Have the Silver Moon Village retreat. If this continues, it'll be disadvantageous for them, the man said after watching for a while longer. Retreat? Just like that? Then wouldn't third young master's previous plans? Before the woman could finish speaking, the man had already turned and descended the mountain. The two women followed after him. As they descended the mountain, they took out their transmission beads to send messages. At that moment, Xiaoling Yu had already disrupted the formation of the silver-armored cultivators. The nearly 500 silver-armored cultivators who had just arrived from the Linggu Valley saw Xiaoling Yu's bravery and naturally followed closely behind him. They were like incomparably sharp blades, stabbing into the enemy's bellies and causing large numbers of casualties. Xiaoling Yu had just charged to a spot 30 meters away from the entrance when the several thousand silver-armored cultivators suddenly retreated to the sides like a receding tide. Xiaoling Yu was a little confused by their retreat, but he didn't chase after them. Although he had disrupted their formation and continuously killed their people, there were still thousands of them. They could still easily kill everyone in the Linggu Valley. However, they didn't do so. This made Xiaolingyu a little confused, so he didn't chase after them. There was no need for him to do so. After charging for a while, Xiaolingyu's clothes were already in tatters and he was dripping with blood. In addition to his dense murderous aura, he really gave off the feeling that he had just climbed out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. The old village chief and the other Lingu Valley cultivators who were originally prepared to break out of the encirclement had actually only launched a round of attacks just now. Seeing that their opponents were already waiting for them seriously, they didn't have any hope of killing their way out. Moreover, they didn't even have the chance to kill their way in front of their opponents, so they rationally gave up on breaking out of the encirclement. At this time, there weren't many casualties. On the other hand, there were only about 200 Lingu Valley cultivators who had followed Xiaolingyu to break out of the encirclement. This was all thanks to Xiaolingyu attracting the enemy's firepower from the front. It was also thanks to Xiaolingyu opening a breakthrough for them. Otherwise, they would have been completely wiped out. Xiaolingyu stood at the entrance of the Rift Valley, his entire body dripping with dirty blood. The 200 or so silver-armored cultivators who were also covered in blood stood behind him. The old village chief and the other Lingu Valley cultivators who were guarding the entrance of the Rift Valley saw this scene and felt very moved and grateful. He is the traitor of our Lingu Valley. Everyone, quickly kill him. The deputy village chief jumped out from the entrance of the Rift Valley and shouted loudly as he pointed at Xiaolingyu. But whether it was the silver-armored cultivators in the Rift Valley or those outside, no one paid any attention to the deputy village chief's shout, nor did anyone attack Xiaolingyu. The old village chief also walked out. He patted the deputy village chief's shoulder and said, "There is definitely a traitor in our village, but it is definitely not him." After saying this, the old village chief walked in front of Xiaolingyu, clasped his fists and bowed, saying, "On behalf of all the villagers of the Lingu Valley, I apologize for mistaking you for being a spy. I apologize for attacking you before, and I thank you for being righteous and saving us. You are the benefactor of the entire Lingu Valley." Although Xiaolingyu did indeed feel resentful, he felt a little better after hearing the old village chief's words and actions. However, Xiaolingyu still walked in front of the deputy village chief and said with a smile, "I am very surprised." The deputy village chief felt that the aura exuding from Xiaolingyu's body made him feel a little suppressed. He involuntarily took a step back and asked in a trembling voice, "Surprised about what?" Xiaolingyu still had a smile on his face and said, "Surprised that you didn't surrender." The deputy village chief forced himself to calm down and snorted coldly, "I am not a coward who is afraid of death. No matter what, I am still the deputy village chief of the Lingu Valley. Why would I surrender and drag out an ignoble existence?" Xiaolingyu continued forward and laughed loudly, "Ha, you have backbone." Xiaolingyu felt that if there really was a traitor in the Lingu Valley, then it must be the high and mighty deputy village chief of the Lingu Valley. Of course, he did not have any evidence. This was only his intuition and guess. Perhaps it was because he hated the deputy village chief that he had such thoughts. Xiaolingyu walked to the side of Yueru and Kongping, then turned and stood still like an ordinary Lingu Valley villager. In the entire Lingu Valley, Xiaolingyu's relationship with Yueru and Kongping was slightly better. Xiaolingyu admired Kongping's righteousness and courage. He was not afraid of power and authority. Xiaolingyu liked Yueru's intelligence, graceful temperament, and magnanimous character. Xiaolingyu also felt close to her. No matter why the silver-armored cultivators suddenly retreated, the people of the Lingu Valley could not stay here any longer. They did not make any adjustments and rushed towards the Lingu Valley at full speed. Along the way, no one spoke. When they looked at their companions, they all had a bit of suspicion in their eyes. Chapter 5:11. Silvermoon Village had originally left 1,000 silver-armored cultivators outside the Lingu Valley, but they had retreated long ago. After returning to the village, everyone naturally needed to recuperate and did not gather to discuss anything. In everyone's hearts, they suddenly realized that if they had listened to Xiaolingyu's opinion previously, the Lingu Valley would not have suffered such a great loss. Previously, the Lingu Valley was already no match for Silvermoon Village. Now, the difference in strength between the two sides had widened considerably. Furthermore, in the battle at the Rift Valley, if Silvermoon Village had not retreated and fought with all their might, the Lingu Valley's armored cultivators would not have survived even if they could rely on Xiaolingyu's help to charge out. In other words, Silvermoon Village had purposely let the armored cultivators of the Lingu Valley go home. They had intentionally let them go, not because they could not defeat them. It was precisely because they had realized this that everyone returned with gloomy expressions and heavy hearts. Most importantly, no one could be sure if Silvermoon Village would still attack the Lingu Valley in the future, or when they would attack again. As for their suspicions of Xiaolingyu, they naturally no longer had any. Not only because everyone had seen Xiaolingyu's performance, but also because of the very certain words the old village chief had said at the Rift Valley entrance. Xiaolingyu had performed outstandingly in this crisis in the Lingu Valley. He was already very famous in the Lingu Valley, and now, his reputation had risen again. No matter who saw him in the village, they would all nod in greeting. There were even some women who looked at him with amorous eyes. Many female cultivators who had always said that they did not want to marry and would not marry, felt their frozen hearts move. If not for the fact that the crisis in the Lingu Valley had not been resolved, the matchmakers would have already trampled on Xiaolingyu's doorstep. Silvermoon Village's attack had not yet arrived, but after a month, Silvermoon Village sent someone to request an audience with the village chief and deputy village chief. No matter what, Silvermoon Village was now in an advantageous position and had the initiative. Thus, the village chief and deputy village chief invited the person from Silvermoon Village into the valley and brought him to a secret room for a discussion. The conversation lasted for a full 2 hours before it ended. Then, the person from Silvermoon Village hurriedly left the Lingu Valley. After that, the 2 village chiefs and the 2 village chiefs of the Lingu Valley also gathered together. Xiaolingyu and Medicine Master Yuuru were also invited. Silvermoon Village's people want us to join their alliance. After everyone had arrived, the old village chief began to speak. After looking at everyone's expressions, he continued, Silvermoon Village belongs to an alliance. That person didn't go into detail about the details of this alliance. He only said that they already have a few dozen villages that aren't any weaker than Lin Valley Village. Moreover, they have a very powerful force supporting them from behind. If we are willing to join, then the leader of that strong backing will come to discuss the details. If we are not willing, at this point, the old village chief paused for a moment, and then continued, if we are not willing, they will not allow the Lingu Valley to exist in the realm of the gods. If we join their alliance, we will be protected and supported by their alliance. However, we will also have to pay tribute every once in a while. Furthermore, if the alliance has any big operations or needs, we will have to send people to help and obey the alliance's orders and arrangements. First, they kill our people, then make us submit collectively. They are too ruthless. If they want us to join, then wouldn't it be better to send someone to negotiate from the beginning? I don't think that person's words are trustworthy. They see that they can't eat us alive, so they are using a scheme now. Yes, they are very good at scheming. The leaders in the secret room began to discuss, but no one seemed to believe the words of the person from Silvermoon Village. However, Xiaolingyu felt that the other party was not lying, because there was no need for them to lie. Furthermore, they had the opportunity to destroy the main fighting force of the Lingu Valley. They must have other considerations if they did not do so. It was easy to understand why Silvermoon Village did not come to negotiate from the beginning, but chose to attack the Lingu Valley first. If they had come to negotiate from the beginning, the Lingu Valley would have rejected them without hesitation. After all, the Lingu Valley did not have any strong enemies in the past, so they did not need any protection or support. Naturally, they would not be willing to pay tribute. For countless years, the Lingu Valley was barely self-sufficient. The village did not have much food in reserve, and they had to support many idle people. Paying tribute every once in a while would undoubtedly increase the burden. Therefore, the alliance that Silvermoon Village belonged to had let Silvermoon Village attack the Lingu Valley first. Firstly, it was to let the Lingu Valley know of their strength, and secondly, it was to let the Lingu Valley feel threatened. It was to let the Lingu Valley know that they needed protection. At the same time, it was to let the Lingu Valley know that their alliance had the strength to protect the Lingu Valley. I feel that the person from Silvermoon Village is not lying. I also feel that we should join their alliance. The Lingu Valley can no longer withstand a war, the deputy village chief said. Although I am the village chief, I cannot make a decision on this matter. Let's follow the old rules and vote, the old village chief said to everyone. What surprised Xiaolingyu was that even the deputy village chief agreed to join the alliance, but the result of the vote was that the majority was not willing to join the alliance. In that case, everyone can disperse. No matter what, everyone should adjust their state of mind and strengthen the defenses around the village. Send more people to stand guard outside, the old village chief said to everyone. Back in his house, Xiaolingyu sighed and said, they won't give up until they see the Yellow River. They won't cry until they see the coffin. Yellow River? Yueru and Kongping were a little confused when they heard this word. Most of the leaders are unwilling to compromise because they know that the village is under a lot of pressure to survive. If they have to pay tribute and contribute to the alliance from time to time, it will make everyone's lives more difficult, and they might not even be able to continue. In addition, they still feel that the alliance might be an excuse from Silvermoon Village. They feel that Silvermoon Village might not have the courage to attack our valley, so they are unwilling to agree to their request, Xiaolingyu analyzed calmly. That is indeed the case, Kongping, who had voted against the alliance, nodded and said. The two village chiefs had made an agreement with the person from Silvermoon Village. If the Lingu Valley did not respond within 2 months, it would mean that they had refused to join the alliance. 2 months passed in the blink of an eye. The old village chief asked for everyone's opinion again. Although 2 of the leaders changed their minds, the leaders who insisted on not compromising still made up the majority. The alliance behind Silvermoon Village really came as promised. A neatly dressed Argent Legion slowly approached the gates of the Lingu Valley. Standing on top of a mountain in the valley, Xiaolingyu looked at the enemies who were like a silver fortress and couldn't help but frown. After a few glances, he realized that there were about 10,000 people on the other side. They didn't look like villagers who were out hunting, but more like an army of tigers and wolves with strict military discipline. With the strength of Silvermoon Village alone, it was impossible for them to gather 10,000 people to attack the Lingu Valley. After all, the entire Silvermoon Village only had about 10,000 people. This meant that the people from Silvermoon Village were not the only ones who had come. There were definitely people from other places as well. Thus, no one doubted the existence of the alliance. Xiaolingyu knew that unless he used the divine weapon, the Lingu Valley's current situation would definitely lead to defeat. Xiaolingyu still didn't dare to use the divine weapon because he knew that he would get into trouble because of his wealth. His current strength was still low. Once the news of him possessing a divine weapon was exposed, he would quickly become the target of the experts in the realm of the gods. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he definitely wouldn't use the divine weapon. The Argent Legion stopped 3,000 feet away from the Lingu Valley's gate. The square formation gradually became a line. Do we still want to fight? The old village chief asked everyone. Looking at the enemy's formation, anyone could guess what the result would be if they continued fighting. Thus, the leaders who had insisted on rejecting the alliance all laughed bitterly and shook their heads silently. Then let's agree to their alliance. As the old village chief spoke, he took out a piece of white cloth and wrote on it, "We are willing to join the alliance." Then, the old village chief tied the white cloth to an arrow and personally pulled the crossbow, shooting the arrow towards the enemy's camp. Under everyone's gaze, the arrow landed in front of the enemy's camp and was picked up by a silver-armored cultivator. Not long after, the arrow was shot back by the other party. The white cloth was still tied to the end of the arrow. Taking down the white cloth and unfolding it, the old village chief and Xiaolingyu saw 2 very eye-catching words. It's too late. Sigh, let's prepare for battle. The old village chief sighed. At this point, there was no use in regretting. Everyone had been forced into a dead end and could only fight with all their might. However, no one blamed the leaders who had insisted on rejecting the alliance. Although everyone was only a small character in the divine realm, small characters had their own dignity. They would also be unyielding and fight back. The enemy didn't give the Lingu Valley too much time to prepare. After they had set up their formation, countless arrows turned into streaks of light that filled the sky and flew from the ground to the top of the mountain above the Lingu Valley's gate. At the same time, a large group of silver-armored cultivators raised their shields and slowly walked towards the blocked entrance of the valley. The Lingu Valley cultivators on the mountain top retaliated with arrows and fireballs that they had prepared beforehand. At the very beginning, it was a contest of attrition. The side attacking the valley needed to exhaust the Lingu Valley's long-range attacks before they could truly attack the mountain top. The old village chief had originally ordered people to light up the huge braziers at the top of the valley to create fire dragons to aid in the defense. However, Xiaolingyu advised the old village chief not to use the braziers for now. Although the old village chief didn't know why, he still chose to believe Xiaolingyu because Xiaolingyu's previous suggestions were all correct. Then, Xiaolingyu quietly went to the back of the valley and left alone. An hour passed. The two sides were still shooting arrows at each other, but Xiaolingyu didn't appear again. 2 hours, 4 hours, after a full half a day, the Lingu Valley's arrows and fireballs had all fallen, but Xiaolingyu still hadn't returned. Chapter 5:12. Xiaolingyu naturally could not have escaped. He had only left temporarily and would definitely return soon. Lin Valley Village's arrows and fireballs had been used up, but they had only managed to kill less than 500 enemies. The enemy had not suffered any serious injuries. Furthermore, they were already climbing up a slope that was not too steep, towards the top of the valley. Next, it would be a hand-to-hand battle between the two armies. However, the enemy's combat power was 3 times that of the Lingu Valley's. There was almost no suspense in this battle. Just then, another piece of bad news arrived. The exit of the secret passageway leading to the outside of Lin Valley Village had been found and blocked by the enemy. Even the new secret passageway that the old village chief had opened with his men had been discovered by the enemy. Fortunately, those passageways could only be used to leave and not enter. Otherwise, the enemy would have used those secret passageways to kill their way into the valley. This was enough to prove that there was definitely a traitor in the Lingu Valley. However, there was no time to find that traitor now. The enemy had already rushed up. The Lingu Valley's last batch of fireballs were pushed down. After killing a few hundred of the enemy, they could only wave their weapons and fight a bloody battle. Village chief, shouldn't we light these braziers? If we don't light them now, I'm afraid we won't have a chance later. The deputy village chief suggested to the old village chief. The old village chief hesitated for a moment, then said, "Let's wait a little longer. If we really want to light them, it's best to do it when most of the enemy is at the mountainside. We can't wait any longer. We should kill more of them first. We can't wait until they're at the mountainside before we act." The deputy village chief did not listen to the old village chief this time. Instead, he led his trusted aides and rushed towards a brazier. The old village chief originally wanted to stop them, but when he saw a large group of flying beasts in the distant sky like rolling dark clouds sweeping over, he himself also ran towards a brazier and shouted for the other villagers to quickly light the braziers beside them. The cries of the flying beasts gradually became clearer, and there were also the howls of wolves mixed in. The villagers of the Lingu Valley, who were standing at the top of the mountain, saw a familiar scene. Countless wolf demons were rushing over from afar like huge waves in the ocean. In the sky, there were countless flying beasts. The flying beasts were chasing after the wolf demons, and the wolf demons were chasing after Xiaolingyu. At this moment, Xiaolingyu was riding on the back of the chaos beast, Fudi. Behind him were 5 silver-haired wolf kings. He had provoked these silver-haired wolf kings, but they couldn't catch up to him. That was why these wolf kings were completely enraged. Then, these wolf kings summoned their children to attack Xiaolingyu. As for the Fudi, he had woken up from his slumber half a month ago. After digesting the cultivation of so many wolf kings, the Fudi's strength had increased significantly. At least now, his speed was much faster than that of the silver-haired wolf kings. If not for the fact that the foodie had woken up, Xiaolingyu wouldn't have had the courage to provoke so many silver-haired wolf kings without using the divine weapon. Xiaolingyu, who was standing steadily on the back of the foodie, would occasionally use the chaos seal to bombard the wolf pack behind them. Every time, he would kill a large number of wolf demons, which was why so many flying beasts were attracted. The wolf demons that covered the mountains and plains, as well as the flying beasts that blotted out the sun, shocked the Lin Valley village cultivators and the silver-armored cultivators. They looked at Xiaolingyu in disbelief. However, this situation naturally brought hope to the Lingu Valley, because the wolf demons would definitely attack the other party first. At this moment, the leaders of the Lingu Valley understood why Xiaolingyu had asked them not to light the braziers previously. It was because the braziers had to be left to deal with the flying beasts in the sky. When the silver-armored cultivators found out that there were countless wolf demons rushing towards them, it was already too late for them to retreat. Now that they were surrounded by countless wolf demons, they could only turn around and rely on the mountains of the Lingu Valley to defend themselves. They were powerless to attack the Lingu Valley again. Xiaolingyu rode on the foodie and didn't rush to the top of the valley. Instead, he led the silver-haired wolf king around the Argent Legion. When the silver-haired wolf king saw that they couldn't catch up to Xiaolingyu, and that there were a large number of human cultivators gathered here, they finally found a place to vent their anger. They began to command the wolf pack to attack the Argent Legion crazily. The Argent Legion's long-range attacks had already been used up in the battle with the Lingu Valley. At this moment, they could only use their shields to block in front of them and use the sharp blades in their hands to assassinate the wolf demons. However, the Argent Legion could hold on for a long time against ordinary wolf demons, but there were still silver-haired wolf kings in the wolf pack. A silver-haired wolf king fiercely rammed into the Argent Legion, knocking over a large number of them in an instant. No one would have thought that the situation would be so grim for the Argent Legion. It was very likely that they would be completely wiped out here. The Lingu Valley only defended against the flying beasts in the sky. Although the pressure was not small, their huge braziers had a strong restraining effect on the flying beasts. They could at least hold on for a long time. Compared to facing the attacks of the Argent Legion, the Lingu Valley was naturally more willing to face these flying beasts. On a steep mountain peak not far from the Lingu Valley, the brocade-robed man and the two beautiful women behind him were all frowning at this time. "This guy is really hateful," one of the women said hatefully. "That mount of his should be at the heavenly god stage." Another woman added, "That mount is not at the heavenly god stage." The brocade-robed man shook his head and then said, "The two of you go down and deal with those wolf king." "Yes." The two women hugged their swords and directly jumped down from the top of the mountain. At the foot of the mountain, there were also countless wolf demons, but these wolf demons did not notice that there were people on the top of the mountain before, so they did not attack. As soon as the two women landed, they naturally attracted a swarm of nearby wolf demons, but they were not afraid at all. Moreover, they did not let their long swords out of their sheaths. Instead, they were like two sparrowhawks, lightly and nimbly shuttling through the pack of wolves, and were actually able to avoid the attacks of all the wolf demons. After a few flashes, the two women, who were dressed in blue today and carrying long swords, had already rushed to the side of the Argent Legion. Then, they quickly separated and each attacked a silver-haired wolf king. What was surprising was that although they looked thin and fragile, just a sweep of their swords had already caused a deep wound on the silver-haired wolf king's body. The silver-haired wolf king had the cultivation of the heavenly god stage, but it was only at the early stage of the heavenly god stage. Compared to human cultivators of the same stage, wolf demons' overall strength was inferior. Looking at the speed of the two women's attacks, as well as the lethality of their long swords, it was clear that they were definitely at the heavenly god stage, and did not seem to be at the early stage. Although the silver-haired wolf king tried its best to dodge and even tried to counterattack, every wolf king that faced the two human women could only last for less than 10 breaths of time before it let out a few miserable cries and fell heavily to the ground, blood flowing into a pool. Foodie was still moving quickly, and Xiaolingyu, who was on its back, looked at the two women with great surprise. There were definitely no heavenly gods in the nearby villages, and there was no meaning or future for heavenly god stage cultivators to stay in the village. All the villagers who had reached the heavenly god stage would choose to leave the village and go to other places to seek development. And these two women had helped the Argent Legion, so it was easy to guess which alliance they were from. Suddenly, Xiaolingyu turned her gaze and looked behind her. At this moment, there was actually another person, and it looked like he was definitely at the heavenly god stage. The newcomer was dressed in embroidered robes and shuttled through the wolf pack. Ever since Xiaolingyu noticed him, he only used 3 breaths of time to rush to Xiaolingyu's side, and a long sword that emitted a cold light appeared in his hand. This long sword was close to the quality of a high-grade divine artifact, and appeared to be incomparably sharp. The cultivator in embroidered robes held it horizontally, and with bursts of sword light, he stabbed it towards Xiaolingyu's shoulder. Xiaolingyu knew that the newcomer was very strong, so he did not dare to be careless. First, he leaned to the side, and then used the silver moon-broken saber to clamp the long sword, so that the long sword would not change its move and sweep across his neck. The newcomer did not change his move, but instead jumped and brushed past Xiaolingyu. Just as the newcomer's body was about to fall, the newcomer suddenly swept his hand back. Not only was the attack sharp, but it also swept out a large area of shining white sword light. Xiaolingyu was also very experienced in fighting. He immediately climbed onto Fudi's back and dodged the opponent's thunderous attack. At this moment, Fudi flew far away, and under Xiaolingyu's instructions, rushed to the top of the valley. The cultivator in embroidered robes did not seem to really want to fight to the death with Xiaolingyu. He casually dealt with a few wolf demons that approached him, and then leaped with his back to the valley, disappearing in a few moments. Xiaolingyu went to the top of the mountain, and first looked for the cultivator in embroidered robes, and then learned from Kong Ping that the cultivator had flown away. Only then did he relax a little, and then began to help everyone block the attacks of the flying beasts. Outside the valley, the two women had also killed all the Wolf King, but they could not stop the countless wolf demons from continuing to attack the Argent Legion's defense. Perhaps because the death of the silver-haired Wolf King had stimulated the wolf demons, their attacks were almost continuous, and there was no sign of them stopping. Fortunately, the Argent Legion's formation was very stable. Without the Wolf King's attack, their defense was much easier, and at this time, the two heavenly deity women were helping them. However, the Argent Legion had people dying almost every moment, and their casualties were increasing with time. Chapter 5:13. Such a huge battle would definitely consume a lot of energy. Not only would the bodies of the human practitioners gradually become unable to take it, their condition would gradually deteriorate. It was the same for the wolf demons and flying beasts. The reason why they retreated was most likely because they needed to replenish their energy. Furthermore, the night in the realm of the gods was rather special. The distance that practitioners could see at night would be greatly reduced, and even the range that their consciousness could cover would be reduced. In fact, in this battle, the silver-armored practitioners in the Lingu Valley did not cause many casualties to the other side. It was originally a battle between them, but in the end, it became a battle between them and the wolf demons and flying beasts. The Lingu Valley had special weapons to deal with the flying beasts. Furthermore, they did not suffer any attacks from the ground, so their losses were very small. Most of the villagers were injured, and less than 100 people died in the battle. However, it was different for the Argent Legion. Not only did they face countless attacks from the wolf demons, they were also occasionally attacked by the flying beasts. Most importantly, the silver-haired Wolf King also caused them a lot of trouble. As a result, they suffered heavy casualties. More than 10,000 people came, but now, only about 3,000 people were left. Furthermore, most of these 3,000 people were also seriously injured. This was all thanks to the help of the two female gods. Otherwise, this seemingly mighty Argent Legion would have been completely wiped out. As a result, it was definitely impossible to continue attacking the Lingu Valley. the Argent Legion was even worried that the Lingu Valley would suddenly charge out. Together with the wolf demons and flying beasts, they quickly retreated and distanced themselves from the Lingu Valley. A battle that was undoubtedly a victory for the Argent Legion had turned out like this. Not only would this greatly boost the morale of the Lingu Valley, it would also deal a heavy blow to the morale of the Argent Legion. It would also infuriate the leader of the Argent Legion. The two female gods protected the Argent Legion as they retreated for a distance. Then, they quietly left without saying goodbye. On a mountain peak about 3,000 miles away from the Lingu Valley, the two female gods stood behind the man in embroidered clothes. Although they had just fought for a few hours, their clothes were still very clean. However, a few strands of messy hair on their foreheads proved that they had not been relaxed before. Although the ordinary wolf demons and even the Wolf King could not do anything to the two female gods, they were still able to exhaust the two female gods. The two female gods also had to continuously wield their swords to kill the endless wolf demons. What should we do next? Should we charge straight into the village? A woman asked anxiously as she brushed the hair on her forehead. I don't want to rely on my family's strength. Although you have been following me, you are still part of the family. The man in embroidered clothes shook his head resolutely. Then, he said, that guy is a talent. However, he alone cannot protect the Lingu Valley. Send a message to the one in the Lingu Valley and ask him to find a way to expel that guy from the village. The female god nodded. Then, she took out her communication bead and sent a message. Not long after, the woman received a reply. She furrowed her brows and said, he said it's very difficult because that fellow has performed meritorious deeds repeatedly. Right now, he's at the peak of his fame, and everyone in Lingu village trusts and respects him. It's very difficult to find a reason to expel him. This is his matter. It is not something for me to consider. I just asked him to do it. He has to do it, and he has to do it. If he can't even do this, what use do we have for him? Just tell him that. After saying this, the man in embroidered clothes turned and left. After the battle, the Lingu Valley was sending off the dead. Everyone gathered in the square in the center of the village. They surrounded the corpses of their fellow villagers, who were neatly arranged around the high platform. As they walked, they silently mourned. The old village chief was on the altar, constantly chanting an ancient incantation. As a villager of the Lingu Valley, Xiaolingyu naturally gathered in the square with everyone else. Although these dead people had nothing to do with him, at least in his eyes, these people were heroes. Moreover, they had died a worthy death. In this world of cultivation, whether it was the world of cultivators, immortals, devils, or demons, or even the current heavenly realm, many cultivators were chasing after a stronger cultivation. They were fighting for treasures, fighting for techniques, fighting for anything. How many people would be willing to contribute? Even Xiaolingyu, if not for his family or friends, would try his best to avoid trouble. He would also fight for benefits. Moreover, he did not like to lose out. The more cultivators cultivated, the thinner and more narrow-minded they became. In this Lingu Valley, Xiaolingyu saw some of the fickleness of human nature. He vaguely felt that he was in a small mountain village in ancient times. For the sake of protecting their loved ones, for the sake of protecting their home, for the sake of this small village, these villagers were worthy of respect. Although their deaths were not enough to bring about any changes to the god realm, and although their deaths would be laughable and powerless in the eyes of many selfish cultivators, they were true heroes. The ceremony did not last long. The old village chief personally placed the corpses into the bonfire. When the fire was extinguished, everyone returned home. Xiaolingyu did not return home. He did not have a real home in this village. He went to the top of the mountain around the valley and looked into the distance with a few villagers who were in charge of guarding the area. Although this battle was a fluke, the enemy had suffered such heavy losses. They would definitely not give up. They would definitely come back again. The Lingu Valley was still in danger. There was an even fiercer test to come. What worried Xiaolingyu was that there were already heavenly gods among the enemy. What did the Lingu Valley have to fight against heavenly gods? At this moment, the villagers of the Lingu Valley were all looking up at the sky. The sky was dark and heavy, just like everyone's mood. Xiaolingyu, on the other hand, was thinking about what he should do. If he continued fighting, the enemy would become anxious. If they sent out heavenly gods, he would have no other choice but to use the divine weapon. If he stopped fighting, he would have to abandon the Lingu Valley. However, he could not let go. Although he did not have deep feelings for the Lingu Valley, these days, he had seen too many Lingu Valley villagers fight with no regard for their lives. He had seen them fall into pools of blood after being attacked by the enemy's swords. He had also seen them look at him with admiration and trust. He really could not bear to see this group of villagers being slaughtered. "What are you looking at?" Yuuru asked softly as he came to Xiaolingyu's side. "Nothing." Xiaolingyu came back to his senses and replied calmly. "Will you leave the Lingu Valley?" Yuuru asked as he sat on a rock beside him. "What about you? If you have the chance, do you want to leave?" Xiaolingyu asked with a smile. "I'm not leaving. I grew up in the Lingu Valley. My father died when I was still in my mother's womb. My mother passed away after giving birth to me. I was raised by these villagers. As long as this village is still here, I will not leave," Yuuru replied calmly. Xiaolingyu could tell that Yuuru was filled with gratitude. Although cultivators like Yuuru were not weak, they had not experienced the hardships and battles of the cultivation world or the three realms of immortals, demons, and demons. They had lived in this small village since they were born. There were not many things that could make them narrow-minded and cold. They were more humane than those cultivators who had ascended from the lower realm. Almost all of the cultivators who had ascended from the lower realm had experienced many hardships. They had been schemed against by others, and they had also schemed against others. Their hearts were no longer pure. I'm the same. As long as this village is still here, I will not leave," Xiaolingyu replied with a smile. However, there was another meaning to his words. If this village was no longer here, he would leave. Xiaolingyu knew that even if the god of heaven intervened, he could still save his own life. However, Yuuru did not know Xiaolingyu's methods and reliance. Therefore, Yuuru thought that Xiaolingyu was prepared to live and die with the village. Therefore, he was moved and grateful. When he looked at Xiaolingyu again, his gaze was warmer and gentler than before. There was also a different kind of color in his eyes. On the second day, the Argent Legion did not make a comeback. On the third day, the fourth day, more than a month had passed. The Lingu Valley was still not under attack. For more than a month, everyone's mood had been very tense. Even now, they had not relaxed. However, everyone was now guessing whether the enemy was unable to attack the Lingu Valley again because of the heavy losses they had suffered last time. If that was the case, it would be great. The ferocious counterattack that they had imagined did not come. As time passed, everyone gradually relaxed. The villagers who had been sent out to investigate also continuously returned with news. Within a few thousand miles of the Lingu Valley, there were no traces of the enemy. At the beginning, Xiaolingyu would often go to the top of the valley to help keep watch. Later on, he lost his patience and returned to his stone house to recuperate. One night, a girl suddenly came to find Xiaolingyu. She said that medicine master Yuuru had invited him over. Xiaolingyu recognized this girl. She was called Embark. She lived next to Yuuru and was learning the art of refining medicine from Yuuru. Many times, Yuuru would invite Xiaolingyu over. If she was too busy, she would ask Embark to come over. After passing the message, Embark walked away alone. "Why do you want me to go over in the middle of the night?" Although Xiaolingyu was a little confused, he still walked over. Yuuru's house was not far from Xiaolingyu's stone house. In just a few moments, he had already arrived at Yuuru's door. Yuuru's house had 3 rooms. There were no windows. At this moment, the door to the living room was open. Xiaolingyu and Yuuru were considered friends and had a good relationship. Thus, he did not greet him and walked directly into the living room. In Xiaolingyu's opinion, since Yueru had invited him first, it was only right for him to leave the door open. Yueru was not in the living room. When Xiaolingyu heard the sound of water coming from the side room, he thought that Yueru was brewing some kind of medicinal decoction and asked him for help. Therefore, he pushed open the side room's door that looked like a screen. Chapter 5:14. However, Yueru did not get up, so all Xiaolingyu could see was her fair neck and blushing face. Xiaolingyu did not feel stunned, nor did he leave the room in a hurry. Instead, he realized that something was amiss. Yueru rarely invited him over at this time. Most of the time, the door to the house was closed, and Emor would be guarding outside. Today was different, so there was a high chance that something was amiss. Xiaolingyu was calm, but Yueru gasped when she saw Xiaolingyu. Yueru's reaction was rather quick. She did not make a loud sound and soon stopped. Even so, her voice was heard outside the door. At this moment, there was the sound of hurried footsteps outside the door. "How dare you, pervert! How dare you peek at Yueru's medicine master!" A few people rushed into the house, and one of them shouted loudly. Xiaolingyu had already closed the door to the side room. He turned around and frowned at the people in the house. He smiled and said, "You came just in time. If we didn't come in time, I'm afraid you would have succeeded." Someone shouted. The person who shouted was Shi Wei. Recently, Shi Wei had been appointed by the village chief and deputy village chief to form a patrol team to patrol the village for the safety of the village. "Ah, do you know what happened?" Xiaolingyu asked with a smile. "Of course. You came to Yueru's room in the middle of the night and startled Yueru's medicine master. You must have bad intentions." Shi Wei said righteously. "So you're just guessing? Based on your guesses, you called me a pervert the moment you came in?" Xiaolingyu asked again with a smile. "Pervert, you still want to quibble? When Yueru's medicine master comes out, we'll know when we ask him," Shi Wei said coldly. Xiaolingyu was too lazy to argue with Shi Wei. He calmly sat on a chair in the living room and waited quietly. This side was originally very quiet, but after Shivita shouted a few times, it naturally attracted a lot of villagers to come over and watch. After all, this was a very special time in the Lingu Valley, and many villagers were very sensitive. If there was even the slightest movement, they would come out to check. "What happened inside?" "I'm not sure. I heard that a perverted thief broke into the Yueru pharmacist's room." "Pervert? No way, how could there be a pervert in our village? Could it be a mistake? Who knows? The patrol team is still investigating inside. I think the village chief and deputy village chief will come in a while." The villagers who were blocked outside by the patrol team were whispering in front of Yueru's house. In the room, Yueru was already neatly dressed as she walked out of the side room. "Medicine Master Yueru, did you scream because he broke into your room just now?" Shi Wei asked Yueru loudly. Everyone outside the house could hear clearly. "Yes." Yueru, who never lied, nodded with a complicated expression. "Everyone heard it, right?" "Medicine Master Yueru has already identified him." Shi Wei shouted loudly, looking a little proud. At this moment, the village chief and deputy village chief also heard the news and came over. The old village chief asked Xiaolingyu, "Why did you come here in the middle of the night?" The old village chief naturally didn't believe that Xiaolingyu was a pervert, but he still had to clarify the matter. "Mor said that Medicine Master Yueru invited me here," Xiaolingyu replied. "Medicine Master Yueru, is this true?" the old village chief asked Yueru. Yueru hesitated for a moment, then nodded and said in a low voice, "Yes." "Since Medicine Master Yueru invited Xiaolingyu here, then it must be a misunderstanding," the old village chief said. I think Medicine Master Yueru is purposely making excuses for him." The deputy village chief smiled and interrupted, "Let's find Mor and ask her." The old village chief glanced at the deputy village chief and said loudly, "Where's Mor?" Not long after, Mor was invited in. However, she looked very surprised and said, No, Medicine Master Uru didn't ask me to invite Shaoling Yu. Could it be that I've forgotten what she told me to do before? Moer's answer made Shaoling Yu laugh coldly, and also made Uru lower his head in shame. What do you have to say? The deputy village chief asked Shaoling Yu. I can't do anything if she doesn't admit it, but the truth is that she said that Medicine Master Uru invited me here, Shaoling Yu said calmly. At this moment, he was 100% sure that someone had colluded with Moer to frame him. It was obvious that the deputy village chief was the one who had schemed against Shaoling Yu. Moer, this is no small matter. You have to tell the truth, the old village chief said to Moer sternly. Moer's eyes flashed a few times. After glancing at the deputy village chief, she nodded solemnly and said, Moer knows, but I'm not lying. You can ask Medicine Master Uru. She really didn't ask me to invite Shaoling Yu. Uru lowered her head, not daring to look at everyone. She was obviously guilty. Perhaps Medicine Master Uru didn't ask you to invite me, but perhaps someone else did. Kong Ping stood out and said. Big Brother Kong, what do you mean by this? Moer looked puzzled. You know what I mean. Don't play dumb here. Kong Ping said bluntly. I really don't know, Moer said with her head tilted. Moer, let me ask you. What were you doing just now? Who are you with? The old village chief asked Moer. I was in my own house. Oh right, Sister Lear was with me the whole time. She can testify for me. I was in my own house the whole time, Moer said confidently. Lear was also invited over, and she did testify for Moer. If Moer isn't lying, then Shaoling Yu is lying. Moer has Lear to testify for her. Shaoling Yu, do you have a witness? The deputy village chief asked Shaoling Yu. Although I don't have evidence, how can you be sure that Moer and Lear didn't collude? Shaoling Yu retorted. Collude? Why would they collude to harm you? The deputy village chief asked with a strange smile. I'm afraid the deputy village chief knows better than I do. Shaoling Yu said without backing down. Village chief, how do you think we should deal with this matter? The villagers outside are all watching and waiting. The deputy village chief didn't argue with Shaoling Yu. Instead, he threw the question to the old village chief. There are still many suspicious points in this matter. Suspicious points? What suspicious points? His sophistry can't be used as suspicious points. We have to pay attention to real evidence before doing anything. Before the old village chief could finish speaking, the deputy village chief had already interrupted. It was the first time in many years that he was so anxious. The old village chief obviously wanted to cover up this matter and didn't want to deal with it now. Moreover, he did suspect that there was something wrong with this matter, so he needed some time to investigate carefully. However, the deputy village chief didn't want to do that. Punish the pervert. Burn him. Chase him out. The villagers outside began to shout loudly, attracting the attention of many villagers who didn't understand the situation. Most of the villagers outside Uru's house didn't know who the so-called pervert was. In fact, many of the villagers had just run over and didn't know what was going on, so they began to shout together. If everyone knew that the pervert was Shaoling Yu, they probably wouldn't have shouted so loudly and in unison. But no matter what, the commotion outside had already been heard. In front of so many villagers, the old village chief did indeed have to give an explanation. As one of the parties involved, Uru didn't know what to say. She naturally didn't believe that Shaoling Yu had any ill intentions towards her. Moreover, she had always felt that Shaoling Yu was an upright and trustworthy person. Although Uru was naive, she could also guess that the deputy village chief had schemed to frame Shaoling Yu. However, no one had any evidence to prove it. How should we deal with this matter? The old village chief asked the deputy village chief. According to the village rules, such a despicable act should be burned at the stake. Of course, he is the benefactor of our village and has made a lot of contributions to our village. Naturally, we can't execute him. However, in order to prevent people from getting hurt in the future, we must expel him from the village. The deputy village chief replied without hesitation. Of course, he is the benefactor of our village and has made a lot of contributions to our village. The old village chief was in a difficult position. Yuuru exclaimed softly, "No!" Both of them knew that the reason this village could survive until today was because of Shaolin Yu. If Shaolin Yu was chased out of the village, then if the Argent Legion attacked the Linggu Valley again, the Linggu Valley wouldn't be able to survive as easily as last time. However, this pervert's crime wasn't small. It wouldn't be right if they didn't punish him. Outside the house, the shouts were still coming one after another, especially from the deputy village head's faction. From the beginning until now, they had almost never stopped. Ha! At this moment, the old village chief suddenly laughed. Previously, I said that there was definitely a traitor in the village. At that time, I wasn't sure who the traitor was, but now, the old village chief looked at the deputy village chief and continued, "Now, I can confirm who the traitor is." The deputy village chief was stared at by the old village chief, but he still straightened his back. He didn't look guilty or afraid at all. "Kang Sun, I don't know why you want to be a traitor, but your actions this time are too obvious." The old village chief turned to look at the villagers outside the house and said, "Our Linggu Valley relied on Shaolin Yu's various heroic performances to get through the previous difficulties. Shaolin Yu is a powerhouse of our Linggu Valley. At this moment, the people who want him to leave our village the most are naturally our enemies. Today's pervert incident was obviously deliberately set up by Kang Sun to frame Shaolin Yu." "Ha!" Deputy Village Chief Kang Sun laughed loudly and said, "Old Village Chief, do you have proof that I'm a traitor? You said that I framed Shaolin Yu, but how do you prove it? I think you're purposely trying to clear his name." Chapter 5:15. Everyone in the village had indeed made a soul oath, and no one was an exception. Even the village chief had made a soul oath. As for why the deputy village chief hadn't made a soul oath, that wasn't something that ordinary villagers would know. "Just because I didn't make a soul oath, you're saying that I'm a traitor? How can that be considered evidence?" The deputy village chief quibbled. "Ha, then do you dare to make a soul oath in front of everyone? If you've done anything wrong to the Linggu Valley, your soul will be destroyed. Do you dare?" The village chief asked with a cold smile. "If you're all bent on doubting me, then it's the same even if I make a soul oath. However, village chief, you're accusing me of framing Shaolin Yu. You should at least provide some evidence and justification, right?" The deputy village chief said without changing his expression. "If it wasn't for the framing, why would Shaolin Yu sneak into this place in the middle of the night to spy on Yuuru's medicine master? The two of them have already pledged to marry each other. They're just waiting for the Linggu Valley to overcome this crisis before they get married. Don't you think that he's up to no good by coming here in the middle of the night? He could have come here openly," the village chief said shockingly. All the villagers, including the deputy village chief, were stunned on the spot. Then, they began to whisper to each other. Shaolin Yu and Yuuru were also stunned. However, Shaolin Yu quickly regained his senses. He knew that the village chief had said this deliberately to erase the name of the pervert. Yuuru was embarrassed after she regained her senses. She didn't dare to raise her head to begin with, but now, her face was flushed red and she lowered her head a few more times. "Haha, village chief, Kang Sun has really underestimated you. As the village chief, you just righteously accused me of being a traitor. Now, you're lying in front of everyone. I really don't know what relationship Shaolin Yu has with you. Could he be your illegitimate child? Why are you so protective of him?" Kang Sun said with a laugh. "You can ask the two of them if I'm lying." The village chief looked at Shaolin Yu and Yuuru. Shaolin Yu did not want to ruin Yuuru's reputation because of this. But before he could say anything, Yuuru had already nodded and said, "It's like this. The two of us are in love with each other and we're indeed engaged." Since Yuuru had already said so in front of so many villagers, if Shaolin Yu said that there was no such thing, not only would it be a waste of Yuuru and the old village chief's good intentions and efforts, it would also cause Yuuru to be criticized by the villagers. Thus, he could only thank them in his heart and no longer deny it. Upon hearing Yueru's words, Deputy Village Chief Kong Sun's expression turned very unsightly. He said in a deep voice, "Even if there was an engagement, you can't just barge into a girl's room, right?" However, the village chief followed up and said, "Don't talk nonsense. If you don't dare to swear in front of everyone today, then I'll convict you of the crime of betrayal." The deputy village chief smiled and said, "I'd like to see how you'll convict me of the crime of betrayal without any evidence." After Kong Sun finished speaking, his faction of villagers began to clamor. They had originally been standing in the back and hiding in the shadows, but now they were already squeezing towards the door. As for the villagers who had always been very loyal to the village chief, they were also eager to fight. The ordinary villagers naturally moved out of the way, not wanting to be involved in such a battle. After the two groups of people squeezed to the door, they stood on opposite sides and glared at each other. They were waiting for the person inside to give the order to immediately start fighting. For countless years, although the relationship between the village chief and the deputy village chief wasn't very close, this was the first time they were at daggers drawn like this. The village chief walked to the door and said with a dignified face, "This isn't a battle between me and Kong Sun, but a battle between the entire Lingu Valley and the traitors. I can very responsibly tell everyone that if it weren't for the existence of a traitor like Kong Sun in our village, we wouldn't have suffered so many losses in the previous battle. Villagers, think of those villagers who died in battle, think of your loved ones who died not long ago. They died innocently because of Kong Sun. Think of the bullying you've suffered in the past, think of what Kong Sun has done for our village all these years, and how much he has received from our village. Then you can decide whether or not to capture this traitor." The deputy village chief knew that the village chief's prestige in the Lingu Valley was very high, and his name as a traitor had already been confirmed. Moreover, if the village chief continued to agitate him, he was afraid that he would really be surrounded by the entire village. Therefore, the deputy village chief Kong Sun's face turned cold, and he gave a few people beside him a look. Then, they all attacked at the same time, shooting out a few rays of light towards the village chief's back. Just as Kong Sun and the others attacked, Shaolin Yu also quickly moved. Just as the rays of light flew out, Shaolin Yu's fists each hit a person. The two people who were hit by Shaolin Yu's iron fists immediately crawled forward and rushed out. The village chief dared to have his back facing Kong Sun and the others, and dared to oppose them at this time, so naturally, he was prepared for a sneak attack. Therefore, just as the rays of light were about to hit the village chief's back, a black iron shield suddenly appeared behind him. The black iron shield appeared to be rusty and cracked, but it was able to withstand the bombardment of the streaks of light. However, the black iron shield took the greater impact, and it also hit the village chief's back, and then rushed out of the house with the village chief's body. The two villagers who were hit by Shaolin Yu almost rushed out of the house with the village chief. The village chief quickly stabilized his body, but his breathing was a little chaotic. However, the two people heavily crashed to the ground, and then their bodies twitched a few times, and then they lost their breath. "The Kong family, they deliberately ostracized us, fight them to the death." Kong Sun rushed in front of his own people, then took out his weapon and shouted loudly. Kong Sun betrayed the village, and everyone has the right to punish him. What are you all waiting for? The village chief also took out a long saber and shouted to the surrounding villagers. It was unknown whether the village chief's prestige was too high, or whether everyone believed that the deputy village chief was a traitor, or whether they had long disliked the deputy village chief's actions in the village, but after the village chief shouted, most of the villagers who were not in the deputy village chief's faction took out their weapons. "Kill!" The village chief roared, and the long saber in his hand immediately emitted a cold light, and he took the lead to attack. The village chief's loyal followers and the villagers also shouted "kill" and followed suit. Previously, the Lingu Valley had been through a series of bitter battles, and now there was not much fighting power left, but the deputy village chief's faction did not suffer too many losses. Although it was difficult for them to win, they should be able to kill their way out of the Lingu Valley. However, this was on the premise that Shaolin Yu did not attack. If Shaolin Yu attacked, Kong Sun and the others would not be able to survive. The village chief chose to publicly fall out with Kang Sun because of him, so Xiaolingyu naturally could not sit back and do nothing. Previously, when he attacked the two patrolling villagers who had attacked the village chief, his attitude and position were clear. Xiaolingyu held the silver saber in his hand, and it constantly shone with divine light. Moreover, it moved at an extremely fast speed, and wherever it passed, blood spurted from the bodies of Kang Sun's subordinates. Kang Sun also knew that the situation was not good for him, so he led his subordinates to the gate of the valley from the beginning, and retreated as they fought. Unfortunately, before they could retreat to the gate of the village, they had lost most of their fighting power. Kang Sun's helpers were decreasing, and by the time they reached the gate of the village, there were only about 100 villagers left, and they were completely surrounded. You are just a mere Lingu Valley, and you want to go against the alliance? You are like ants trying to shake a big tree, and you will regret it sooner or later. After saying this, the deputy village chief rushed to the gate of the village, but then his body was bombarded by dozens of attacks, and his body exploded. As for the villagers who followed the vice village chief, they had no choice but to throw away the weapons in their hands on the ground. The old village chief ordered people to lock up all the villagers who had given up on resisting and take them away. Then, he arranged for people to settle down the frightened villagers and clean up the battlefield. Although they had won this battle, the strength of the Lingu Valley had been greatly reduced, and such internal strife had greatly affected the morale of the villagers. Xiaolingyu then returned to his residence, and he was not in a good mood. First, he had been wrongly accused of being a pervert, and then he had to fight to the death. Xiaolingyu did not feel any pressure, but he was very depressed. For a few days, the atmosphere in the Lingu Valley was very gloomy. Although the blood had been washed away, the panic and confusion in the hearts of the villagers could not be erased. The threat from the alliance had not been eliminated, and the fighting power of the village had decreased significantly, which made everyone gradually lose their sense of security. As for the matter of Xiaolingyu barging into Yueru's room, the old village chief had already concluded. At this time, no one was in the mood to chat or care about this, and they even ignored the marriage agreement that the old village chief had mentioned and that Yueru had personally acknowledged. Everyone could choose not to think about it, but Yueru would. However, the more he thought about it, the more confused he became. In the end, he could only sigh and say, "Sigh, let's see if we can get through this crisis first. If we can't, what's the use of thinking about it?" After another 10 days, the so-called Alliance's army still had not arrived, but the villagers of the Lingu Valley had already decided to leave the valley that they had lived in for so many years. Although leaving the village and moving on a large scale was also very dangerous, after all, the village was surrounded by barren mountains and dense forests, and there were countless wolf demons and flying beasts. After all, it was very likely that the enemy would detect their movements and send a large army to encircle and annihilate them. Without the geographical advantage of the valley that was easy to defend and difficult to attack, it would be even more difficult for them. However, most of the villagers still agreed to leave the valley. Just as the villagers of the Lingu Valley were quietly moving through the secret passage, the young cultivator in embroidered robes and the two women also received the news. Now is the best time for us to exterminate them. As long as we break up their formation and let them run in all directions, they will be gradually devoured by the wolves. We don't have to waste any more effort, one of the women suggested. Chapter 5:16. But they caused so much damage to us. Are we just going to let them go? One of the women said unwillingly. Why bother? They were forced to fight back, but we attacked them forcefully. Even though we suffered some losses, it's fine as long as we achieved our goal, the man in brocade laughed. The man in embroidered clothes smiled, then changed the topic and said, however, that fellow called Xiaolingyu from their village is a little interesting. He's a talent. If we can recruit him and nurture him, he might be of great use in the future. There are many capable people who are willing to join Third Young Master. I don't think he's any better than those people, another woman said unhappily. At least he's more courageous. That's the most important thing, the man in brocade clothes said. We've already taken over the Linggu Valley. As long as we take over the last village, Lanquan Village, we'll be able to connect the 8 million miles between Kun City and the new mine. Third young master will have achieved great success. Patriarch will be very happy when the time comes, but first young master and second young master will be dumbfounded, a woman said happily. We've been away for quite some time. We've wasted a lot of time in the Linggu Valley. We have to take over Lanquan Village as soon as possible. This time, we'll recruit more men from the other villages and try to take over Lanquan Village in one go, the man in brocade clothes said seriously. Xiaolingyu naturally had to follow the mass migration of the Linggu Valley. It was not that he was dead set on taking over the Linggu Valley, but he had to protect the villagers as much as he could. He did not want the villagers to lose their lives to the claws and teeth of the wolves before they could find a new home. Fortunately, the old village head was very familiar with this vast and boundless forest. With him leading everyone, there were very few dangerous situations along the way. After more than a month, they arrived at a small river with flowing blue water. They continued to walk along the river, and after a day, they saw a huge mountain. The side of the mountain facing the group was very steep. The surface of the mountain was flat, as if it had been sliced from top to bottom by a giant sword. On the walls of the mountain, there were many small holes that looked like windows from afar. This reminded Xiaolingyu of the myriad bat cave on the continent where Maozhen, the alchemy grandmaster of the immoral world, lived. The blue river flowed from the foot of the mountain. Compared to the majesty of the mountain, it was like a thin blue line. Up ahead is the Blue Spring Village. The villagers live in caves halfway up the mountain, so they can avoid being attacked by demon wolves. Furthermore, the villagers of the Blue Spring Village are good at rearing birds. Not only can the birds protect their homes, they can also be released to hunt for meat for them. Because of this, the Blue Spring Village has always been relatively wealthy, the old village chief said as he pointed at the mountain not far away. Should we go to Lanquan Village to rest first, or should we go around Lanquan Village and continue along this river? A village leader asked. Let's go around it. The villagers of the Blue Spring Village are not very hospitable. They are also very repulsed by outsiders because they are worried that others will learn their techniques of rearing birds and beasts. To avoid trouble, it's best if we don't have any interactions with them, the old village chief said, shaking his head. However, the old village chief did not expect that just as he was about to lead everyone to take a detour, a cultivator from the Blue Spring Village flew over on a large bird and landed in front of the group from the Linggu Valley. The person who came was the village chief of the Blue Spring Village. He knew that this group was from the Linggu Valley. He even said that he represented the villagers of the Blue Spring Village to welcome the people from the Linggu Valley to the Blue Spring Village as guests. When he heard that the old village chief of the Linggu Valley had said that the entire village was migrating, he even represented the Blue Spring Village in welcoming everyone from the Linggu Valley to the Blue Spring Village. The suggestion of the village chief of the Blue Spring Village was naturally tempting. After all, the Blue Spring Village was very wealthy and had unique skills. However, the old village chief of the Linggu Valley rejected the other party's good intentions and insisted on taking everyone to take a detour. The reason why he rejected the offer was because the situation was abnormal. With the temperament of the villagers of the Blue Spring Village, how could they accept so many people from the Linggu Valley to join them? After all, most of the people from the Linggu Valley were idlers and there were not many real laborers. Moreover, even if they were sincerely willing to take them in, it would be very difficult for the people from the Linggu Valley to integrate into the Blue Spring Village. The villagers from the two villages had different attitudes and lifestyles, and there would definitely be conflicts in the future. In the end, they might even break up. The leaders of the villagers from the Linggu Valley were also unwilling to go to the Blue Spring Village and be subjected to other people's displeasure, so they tacitly supported the old village chief's decision. The village chief of the Blue Spring Village gave the people from the Linggu Valley an hour to consider. When the people from the Linggu Valley were about to go around the mountain, he rode his flying beast to catch up with them and then told them the truth. The reason why the Blue Spring Village wanted to take in the people from the Lingu Valley was because they had received reliable information that there would be a large army attacking the Blue Spring Village soon. They felt that they would not be able to secure victory with just their own strength, so they needed the help of the Lingu Valley. The old village chief could guess that the large army attacking the Blue Spring Village would be sent by the alliance that had attacked the Lingu Valley before. The people of the Lingu Valley had also experienced the strength of the alliance, and it was because of this alliance that the entire village had been forced to migrate. Therefore, even though the village chief of the Blue Spring Village had proposed many tempting conditions, the old village chief still did not agree. In the eyes of the old village chief and many other leaders of the Lingu Valley, even if the Lingu Valley and the Blue Spring Village joined forces, they would not be able to defeat the alliance that had a heavenly god expert. When the old village chief bid farewell to the Blue Spring Village chief, he also advised the village chief to make plans early. If he was not willing to join the alliance, it would be better for him to migrate as soon as possible. The villagers of the Blue Spring Village had always been proud and naturally did not want to join the alliance. After all, there was no tangible benefit to them. However, the village chief of the Blue Spring Village felt that if a village like the Lingu Valley could resist the alliance's attack and even had the opportunity to migrate, there was no reason for the Blue Spring Village to be afraid of the alliance. Looking at the people of the Lingu Valley who were slowly migrating, the village chief of the Blue Spring Village said with disdain, "No wonder you were beaten so miserably. You are all a bunch of cowards." The villagers of the Lingu Valley went around the mountain and continued to move forward. It took them almost 3 months before they stopped in front of a mountain range that undulated like waves. I've been to this mountain range before. There is a place that is very similar to the valley that our village used to live in. We have settled down there. The old village chief looked at the mountain range in front of him. He could not hide his excitement because they were very close to their goal. There were many more demon wolves in the mountain range than anywhere else. However, when the demon wolves saw such a large group, they usually did not dare to come close. The more experienced villagers knew that they could not easily kill the demon wolves. It was best to scare them away. If they were killed, they might attract a large group of demon wolves to take revenge. The old village chief remembered correctly. They did not go too deep into the mountain range. They really did see a valley surrounded by mountains. However, the valley was shrouded in layers of fog. They could only vaguely see the silhouettes of the mountains. It's a bit strange. I remember that when I came here, there was no such dense fog. Why is it like this now? The old village chief said with a puzzled expression. So much time has passed. It's inevitable that things will be different from the past. It's very difficult for anything to remain the same, one of the village leaders said with a smile. Seeing that they had arrived at their destination, everyone naturally relaxed a lot. The long journey had made them nervous. They had been looking forward to their destination for a long time. You guys, come with me and take a look at the situation first. The old village chief waved at the village leaders, then said to Xiaolingyu, I'll leave this place to you to look after. After Xiaolingyu nodded, the old village chief led the village leaders into the valley. For hours later, the old village chief and the others returned without a hitch. They told everyone that there were no abnormalities inside. They could go in and build their new home. This fog is also good for us. It will make the wolf demons not dare to approach easily. It can also conceal our existence to a certain extent, the old village chief said with satisfaction as he led everyone into the valley. I feel that this place is a bit strange, Yueru said with a frown after coming into contact with the fog in the valley. As a medicine master, Yueru's perception was far superior to that of ordinary cultivators of the same age. Thus, her words made Xiaolingyu pay attention. However, everyone had gone through a lot to get here. Naturally, they would not leave just because of Yuru's strange feeling. Moreover, everyone felt that Yuru had been too tired and nervous recently, which was why she had such a strange feeling. After entering the valley, the old village chief had the villagers who often went out to hunt carefully check the entire valley again. When they still didn't find anything out of the ordinary, they dispersed to find a place to build their new home. Although they were only low-level cultivators in the realm of the gods, and although they were only villagers of a small village, they were still gods and not real villagers of the mortal world. The speed at which they built their new home was naturally very fast. In less than half a day, the valley had already changed its appearance. Everything in the valley gradually became familiar and intimate. This was because many of the buildings and pavilions were similar to the original Lingu Valley's layout and style. Less than 2 months after the new Lingu Valley's construction was completed, more than 10 shabbily dressed cultivators suddenly came to the side of the valley. However, they were all blocked outside by the Lingu Valley's villagers who were in charge of guarding the valley. After some questioning, everyone found out that these people were villagers of Lanquan village. Furthermore, Lanquan village had already been invaded. They were the villagers who had luckily escaped after the defeat of Lanquan village. Chapter 5:17. The village chief in Xiaolingyu had expected Lanquan village's defeat. If not for the fact that Xiaolingyu still had some tricks up his sleeve, the Lingu Valley would have been destroyed a long time ago. Although the Lingu Valley was not as powerful as Lanquan village did not have any heavenly god experts either. Without a true powerhouse, facing the alliance of many mountain villages and the alliance of heavenly god powerhouses, any small mountain village could only surrender or be destroyed. These people had escaped from the battlefield. They did not dare to return to Lanquan village because they did not know what the village was like now. The main force of the Lanquan village had already been defeated. Most likely, the entire Lanquan village was either massacred or forced to swear allegiance to the alliance. Lanquan village is only 3 months away from here. I don't think it's safe for us to stay here, Xiaolingyu said worriedly. There are 2 other villages near the Blue Spring village, but they are not in our direction. The alliance will most likely try to subdue those 2 villages and will not approach us. After all, beyond this mountain range is a large grassland, and beyond the grassland is a vast and boundless forest. We should not attract the alliance's attention in this corner. The old village chief casually analyzed. Xiaolingyu did not insist on his opinion because he did not have a good reason to convince everyone. However, now that the Lingu Valley had settled down again, he had plans to leave the village. Although he had not reached the heavenly god stage, at least he was not afraid of the heavenly god silver-haired wolf king. Even if he left alone, there should not be much danger. In the past few days, Xiaolingyu had asked around and found out that the greatest danger in this vast forest was the silver-haired wolf king and other heavenly god beasts. This was why many villages required villagers to reach the heavenly god stage before they could leave the village to seek greater development. With his reputation in the Lingu Valley and his contributions to the Lingu Valley, it should not be a problem for him to ask the village chief for a relatively safe route to the city. This was indeed the case. Xiaolingyu went to the village chief and told him his request. Although the village chief felt that it was a pity and wanted to persuade him to stay, he still gave a jade slip to Xiaolingyu. Naturally, this jade slip had a map of the route engraved on it, as well as some fairly detailed introductions and reminders. Xiaolingyu did not look at it in detail. After a rough glance, he put it away and returned to his temporary residence. Since he was going to leave, he naturally had to say goodbye to a few people he was on good terms with. The first people Xiaolingyu's Yueru came to mind. Kongping lived next door. When he heard that Xiaolingyu was going to leave the Lingu Valley, he was also very reluctant. He even said, if it wasn't for the fact that the Lingu Valley has just stabilized and still needs manpower, I would have gone with you. As for Yueru, when she heard this news, she was first stunned. Then, her expression became sad, disappointed, and helpless. Having grown up in this small mountain village, Yueru's thoughts were very simple. She did have a good impression of Xiaolingyu. Otherwise, she would not have cooperated with the village chief to lie. However, even though she knew that it was a lie, she was more willing to believe it was true because of that little bit of good feeling in her heart. She was also willing to make the best of it. However, now that Xiaolingyu was going to leave, Yueru instantly felt as if the whole world was about to collapse in front of her eyes. She had been thinking hard these past few days and was extremely conflicted. She had never thought that this would be the result. In her original plan, the worst-case scenario was that everyone would treat the marriage agreement as if no one had mentioned it at all. Then, time would prove everything. Will you come back? Yueru's eyes glistened with tears as she asked. I can't say for sure. If there's a chance, I will definitely come back to take a look, Xiaolingyu said uncertainly. Only Xiaolingyu knew that he did not come to the realm of the gods to enjoy life. He wanted to find his wife. He also wanted to do his best to complete the mission that his chief master had given him. He wanted to take back the primal chaos spectrum that he did not even know where it was. If there was a chance, he also wanted to see the Jiang Lanhua sisters who had helped him before, as well as their cousin. Xiaolingyu estimated that it was impossible to complete these missions with his current strength. He still needed to continue improving. Yueru was silent. She remained silent. Xiaolingyu also sat with her for a while. When night fell, he stood up and said, I won't disturb you anymore. I will set off early tomorrow morning. When Xiaolingyu walked out of the room, the tears that had been swirling in Yueru's eyes turned into 2 streams of clear tears and flowed down from the corners of her eyes. Xiaolingyu did not see Yueru's tears. He also did not expect Yueru to have any thoughts about him. He already had a wife, and not just one. Naturally, he did not dare to ask for too much. In his opinion, a girl like Yueru, who was as calm as still water, should find an honest man to live the rest of her life peacefully. In the wee hours of the morning, the sky had just begun to brighten. The entire Linggu Valley was still very quiet, but Xiaolingyu was already standing outside his room. Generally speaking, these villagers would not sleep at night. Most of them would meditate and cultivate in their own rooms. Although the restrictions on cultivators at night in the realm of the gods were much stronger than during the day, the effects of cultivating at night were also much better than during the day. Stepping into the thick fog, Xiaolingyu walked towards the entrance of the village. No one came to see him off because no one knew that he would leave so early. The old village chief had arranged for him to leave in the early morning as well. However, after taking a few steps, Xiaolingyu felt as if someone was secretly watching him. He could not help but stop in his tracks and look around. However, he did not discover anything. Naturally, there were people guarding the entrance of the village. However, they only thought that Xiaolingyu had some matters to attend to. Thus, after greeting him, they smiled and opened the village door. Xiaolingyu was somewhat reluctant to part with the village, but he still resolutely walked out of the valley. However, he was just like ordinary people who were about to go on a long journey and looked back with every step they took. Under the cover of the night and fog, Xiaolingyu's figure gradually disappeared from the eyes of the villagers at the village entrance. At this moment, Yueru also arrived at the entrance of the village. She looked into the distance with a face full of tears, although she definitely could not see too far. At this moment, the villagers at the entrance of the village could not help but think of the marriage contract. Thus, they felt that Yueru's reaction was very normal. Not only did they not go forward to comfort her, they even looked on from the side and secretly laughed. They did not know that Xiaolingyu might never return after leaving this time. After sorting out his emotions, Xiaolingyu began to hurry along as he carefully studied the route he had taken. The route started from the original Linggu Valley and ended at a city in the realm of the gods called Qin City. Although there were many twists and turns in the middle, the overall route was still a straight line. There were close to 10,000 small villages like the Linggu Valley on this route. If he set off from the original Linggu Valley, the next stop would be Silvermoon Village. What surprised Xiaolingyu was that the current Linggu Valley, Lanquan Village, the original Linggu Valley, and Silvermoon Village were all on the same line. This made Xiaolingyu vaguely feel that there was a problem, but he could not figure out what the problem was. Thus, he continued to move forward. In order to avoid trouble, Xiaolingyu asked Fudi to come along. He stood on Fudi's back and allowed Fudi to gallop at full speed. Xiaolingyu and Fudi's speed was naturally much faster than the speed of the Linggu Valley's villagers moving together. The journey that would have taken a large group 3 months to complete only took him slightly more than 10 days. As Lanquan village had already been conquered by the Alliance, Xiaoling Yu did not want to encounter any more obstacles along the way. Thus, he asked Fudi to go around Lanquan village. Another half a month later, Xiaoling Yu arrived at the Linggu Valley where the original Linggu Valley was located. However, he discovered that there were cultivators standing guard on all four sides of the valley. Furthermore, from afar, he could see that those cultivators were wearing silver armor. It was obvious that the Alliance had taken over this valley. Their goal in attacking the Linggu Valley seems to be just for this valley. But what use do they have for this valley? As Xiaoling Yu pondered, he asked Fudi to leave this valley and head towards Silvermoon Village. Xiaoling Yu had already made a round trip from this valley to Silvermoon Village. Thus, he was relatively familiar with the route. His speed was even faster. In just over 20 days, he arrived at the surging river. The mountain peak where Silvermoon Village was located was also nearby. He did not linger around Silvermoon Village. Xiaoling Yu took out a boat-shaped Dharma treasure and carried himself to the other side of the river. Fudi was then invited into the spiritual beast pouch. Xiaoling Yu chose to cross the river. He was already very far away from Silvermoon Village. However, he did not expect that he would still be discovered. Furthermore, a few small boats chased after him. However, by the time they caught up, Xiaoling Yu had already reached the shore. He then rode Fudi and sped away. In the following year, Xiaoling Yu passed by over 20 villages. Along the way, he encountered ferocious beasts in the heavenly god stage. However, even if he could not defeat them, he could still easily escape. However, after more than a year had passed, he suddenly stopped because he discovered a problem. Starting from the Blue Spring village, there were more than 20 villages along the way. Unexpectedly, there were cultivators wearing silver armor stationed there. Later, he asked around and found out that these more than 20 villages had joined the Alliance. The crux of the problem was that these 20 villages were on the same route. Based on this, if the Alliance wanted to continue advancing after conquering Lanquan village, they would not choose the villages to the left and right of Lanquan village. Instead, they would advance towards the valley where the Linggu Valley was located. Regarding this, Xiaoling Yu sent a message to the village chief. However, as the distance was too far, the village chief could not receive his message. In the realm of the gods, there were not many divine messaging devices. The divine messaging device that the cultivators in the small villages had was the same. The divine messaging device that Xiaoling Yu had was of the lower grade. It could not send a message more than 20,000 miles away. Chapter 5:18. If it was a coincidence that the four villages were on the same route at the beginning, then it was definitely not a coincidence that all 20 villages were on the same route. Furthermore, Xiaoling Yu had also gone to the other villages on both sides of the route to ask around. The results were as expected. The villages that were not on the same route had not been attacked by the Alliance, nor had they received any invitations from the Alliance. This proved that the Alliance had the intention of building a route. As for what their goal was, it was not something that Xiaoling Yu could guess. Xiaoling Yu had already left for more than a year. It would also take him another year to return. Whether he could make it in time was up to fate. What surprised Xiaoling Yu even more was that when he arrived at a place less than 200,000 miles away from the current Linggu Valley, he sent a message to the old village chief. The result he received was that the Alliance had not attacked the Linggu Valley. Instead, they were attacking the villages on both sides of Lanquan village. Could it be that Lanquan village is the end of this route? Or did I guess wrong? Xiaoling Yu began to doubt his previous conjecture. Since this was the case, there was naturally no need for Xiaoling Yu to return to the Linggu Valley. However, the old village chief then sent a message to Xiaoling Yu, saying that Yueru had made a very good discovery in the valley. He even asked Xiaoling Yu if he wanted to return. Xiaoling Yu replied to ask what the discovery was, but the old village chief told Xiaoling Yu to go back and see for himself. Xiaoling Yu knew that since he had decided to leave, he was no longer a citizen of the Linggu Valley. It was normal that the cautious old village chief would not tell him some confidential information. Xiao Lingyu hesitated for a moment, then replied to all the villagers of the Linggu Valley with his blessings. Then, he turned around again. When Xiao Lingyu arrived at the river beside Silver Moon Village, he was stopped by a man in embroidered clothes and two beautiful women. Xiao Lingyu furrowed his brows slightly. He had seen these three people before. The two women had once helped the Silver Armor Army fend off the Wolf Demon's attack in front of the original Valley of Lin Valley Village. The man in embroidered robes had even exchanged a blow with him. The three of them should be experts from the Alliance. Xiao Lingyu did not know why they were here, so he naturally had to be on guard. The three of them were Heavenly God Village chiefs. If they wanted to harm Xiao Lingyu and the foodie would not be able to stop them. They would have to use their divine weapons. After looking at the three of them, Xiao Lingyu's did not have the foodie went. "Brother Xiao, please wait." The three of them were obviously here for Xiao Lingyu. Naturally, they wouldn't let Xiao Lingyu go so easily. They moved a distance away and blocked Xiao Lingyu's path again. The man in embroidered clothes also took a step forward and greeted them. "What's the matter?" Xiao Lingyu stopped and asked with a frown. Xiao Lingyu was not surprised that the other party knew his name. After all, there were traders in the original Linggu Valley. "Nothing important. I just wanted to have a chat with Brother Xiao. I wonder if Brother Xiao would be willing to do me the honor." "Of course, I won't take up too much of your time," the man in the embroidered clothes said very politely. If it was just a chat and not a fight, Xiao Lingyu was naturally willing to accept. The three of them were not weak. Xiao Lingyu did not want to expose his divine weapons, so it was better to keep a low profile. "I don't have anything important. Since you are in the mood, I don't mind accompanying you," Xiao Lingyu replied after pondering for a moment. The man in the embroidered clothes was quite satisfied with Xiao Lingyu's attitude. He immediately waved his hand and set up a table for a banquet. Although it was called a banquet, there were actually only some wine and some simple fruits on the table. Xiao Lingyu and the man in the embroidered clothes sat opposite each other. The two women poured 3 cups of wine for each of them. Not only did the two women not sit, but they also served the banquet as if they were two maids. Xiao Lingyu could not help but think more highly of the man in the embroidered clothes. The man in the embroidered clothes must have an extraordinary background to be able to have a divine god as his assistant. According to the rules of Quin City, let's drink 3 cups of wine first before we talk. Come, let me toast to Brother Xiao. The man in the embroidered clothes finished his words and drank 3 cups of wine in one go. Then, he looked at Xiao Lingyu. Xiao Lingyu was actually a little wary of drinking with outsiders, especially when it was an outsider's wine. This was because he did not dare to guarantee that there was no problem with the wine. Most of the time, even if there was nothing wrong with the wine itself, it might contain too much energy, or it might have some special effect that was unpredictable. However, seeing that the man in the embroidered clothes did not seem to have any abnormalities after drinking the wine, Xiao Lingyu calmly picked up a cup and drank it slowly. From the man's words, Xiao Lingyu also learned that he came from Quin City. Quin City was the only city near this vast and boundless forest. It was also Xiao Lingyu's current destination. As he drank, Xiao Lingyu naturally had to quickly test the characteristics of the wine. Although this would make him seem uncomfortable, it was better to be cautious. He could not put himself in danger for the sake of pleasure. This should be considered a cup of sake. Although it was a little spicy and strong, the alcohol was still within Xiao Lingyu's tolerance. After drinking 3 cups in a row, Xiao Lingyu did not seem to have any abnormalities. Although this wine was ordinary, if an ordinary great divinity cultivator drank 3 cups in a row, they would probably get drunk. "Brother Xiao, you didn't stay in the Linggu Valley for long, right?" The man in the embroidered clothes asked Xiao Lingyu as the two women poured the wine. "Ha, I'm sure the deputy village chief of the Linggu Valley must have told you about my situation." Xiao Lingyu nodded and smiled. "He did tell you a little." The man in the embroidered clothes did not deny it. Then, he asked, "Brother Xiao, why did you leave the Linggu Valley alone this time?" Xiao Lingyu said perfunctorily, I had some matters to attend to. I thought Brother Xiao wanted to enter the sea like a dragon to seek a wider space for development. The man in the embroidered clothes seemed to be hinting at something. Then, the two of them drank another cup. The man in the embroidered clothes asked again, Brother Xiao, looking at the direction you're heading, you should be heading to Kun City, right? Xiaolingyu nodded. From here to Kun City, there are still about 8 million miles of journey. There are also many dangers along the way. Xiaolingyu must have encountered a lot of difficulties along the way. The man in the embroidered clothes seemed to be concerned. That depends on luck, Xiaolingyu said nonchalantly. I'm also preparing to return to Kun City. If we travel together, we can take care of each other along the way. It will be safer. What do you think, Brother Xiao? The man in the embroidered clothes suggested. Xiaolingyu seemed to be in a difficult position. Although he would encounter some difficulties alone, he had a sage weapon and a relatively safe route. He should not encounter any danger. Moreover, he did not know the man in the embroidered clothes well. Naturally, he did not want to travel with them. However, the man in the embroidered clothes was showing goodwill. It would be inappropriate for him to reject him. His destination was indeed Kun City. The man in the embroidered clothes probably had some status in Kun City. It would not be good for him to not give face to him. After thinking about it, Xiaolingyu still found it difficult to make a decision. You people from the Linggu Valley are really nostalgic. You actually moved into another valley on such a large scale. The man in the embroidered clothes suddenly spoke. Xiaolingyu's expression changed slightly when he heard this. However, he soon understood. The Linggu Valley was moving on such a large scale. Naturally, they would not be able to avoid detection. However, Xiaolingyu did not know how to reply to the man in the embroidered clothes. He smiled and clasped his fist. Haha, I hope that the three of you will take care of me on the journey in the future. It's hard to say who will take care of who. Brother Zhao's strength is not inferior to ours, the man in the embroidered clothes said politely. After drinking a few more cups, Xiaolingyu ended the banquet because he could not hold his liquor. The four of them then began their journey to Kun City. Along the way, the two women basically didn't speak, while Xiaolingyu and the man in embroidered clothes were constantly trying to sound each other out. Although the man in the embroidered clothes seemed to be generous to Xiaolingyu, Xiaolingyu only knew that his surname was Qi Hongxian after traveling with him for more than 10 days. The Qi family was one of the 3 major families in Kun City. As everyone's destination was Kun City, Qi Hongxian introduced Kun City more. However, he did not mention much about his own family or the matters of this trip. Of course, Qi Hongxian could not obtain much information from Xiaolingyu. In fact, Xiaolingyu did not experience much after he ascended. Most of the things that had happened to him had already been conveyed to Qi Hongxian through the deputy village chief of the Linggu Valley. During the journey, Qi Hongxian would stop at every village for a short period of time before continuing with Xiaolingyu. This period of time was not long. It was usually around 2 hours. At most, it was less than 4 hours. Xiaolingyu could already guess that this young master of the Kun City's Qi family was actually the head of this alliance. He was very curious as to why Qi Hongxian wasn't enjoying his life in Kun City, but instead came out to create this alliance. To a heavenly god expert like the Qi family, which had many heavenly god experts, what was so special about these villages that they coveted? Time slowly passed in this boring journey. Many things that should be said had already been said at the beginning of the journey. It was also difficult to say what should not be said. However, Xiaolingyu could clearly feel that the 3 of them did not have the slightest bit of malice towards him. It seemed that they were sincere in joining him on the journey. After nearly 10 years, the 4 of them had only covered 1/3 of the journey. Xiaolingyu also discovered that the closer they got to Kun City, the shorter the distance between the villages. Now, the distance between every 2 villages was at least 2,000 miles. The short distance was only 100 miles. At this time, the 4 of them arrived at an endless swamp. Qi Hongxian also stopped in front of it. Apart from the fact that the water was black, there was nothing special about the swamp. However, Qi Hongxian said to Xiaoling Yu in a serious tone, "This place is called the Blackwater Swamp. There are many poisonous creatures in the heavenly god stage that roam around here. Moreover, there is often a poisonous mist that permeates the air. It might be dangerous to venture deep into the swamp." You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.